So my understanding is they are aware, but we have not heard from them really in any direction.
Gotcha.
Okay. Technically, we have enough to start.
The bottom of the laundry basket.
Willing to, I'd like to wait at least another couple minutes just to see if we get anybody else in.
Okay, I'm just gonna run and see if I can get something to adjust this light.
Oh, looks nice. All right, well, now I know the spots. This. Yeah. Well, so Dwayne told me he wasn't coming, and then was Betty out of town? Yeah.
I believe Betty is out.
Yeah, we knew Betty couldn't make this meeting.
Sometimes it takes Lee a little bit to get in. And we have,
Okay. Who's 296-5173? Nobody.
Say it again.
603-296-5173.
It doesn't matter. They don't have to say who they are. They just got to
No.
tell you if they're a planning board person.
Well, that's all I want to know.
Yep.
And then there's 942 5463.
Tim Jandiver.
Okay, I'm gonna change your name.
What are you going to change it to?
What would you like me to change it to?
Detroit. How about Tim?
I'm just gonna call you Tim. How about that?
Fine.
And then
Joe, are you calling in as well as,
No, I
phone?
should be on vid. I should be on video unless it's crapped out on me.
nope, I think you're okay. It's more, I wanted to, if you were in twice, I was wondering, I just saw the other phone number pop up with your voice, but the only thing I'd suggest is, well, we don't have to mute them.
well, in the Galaxy S8,
1684. Is that showing up the last four?
no.
No, you're
No.
good. You're good. You only have a single connection, which is fine.
Okay.
Well, I guess that's
Okay,
not.
so that's
all right.
5 of us. Why don't we
Yeah, that's fine.
get going? Where did I put that? Oh, hang on.
Falling out. Just put it in the garbage. Put it in the garbage. Put it in the garbage. Don't make him eat it. He'll get a hairball.
So I'll call the Town of Northwood Planning Board meeting on July 9th, 2020 to order at 7:07 p.m. And before we take attendance and voting designation, due to circumstances associated with the coronavirus pandemic and pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, which declared New Hampshire to be in a state of emergency due to novel coronavirus COVID-19. An emergency exists as defined by RSA 91-A:2, paragraph 3 for the July 9th, 2020 Town of Northwood Planning Board meeting. Board members who are unable to attend in person may participate via electronic communication and will be deemed to be present at the meeting for purposes of quorum and voting. And members of the board, please state your name if you're in attendance.
Joe McCaffrey.
Victoria Parmalee.
Tim Vandenberg.
Al Kreider.
And Bob Strobel. All members present electronically are also added to our voting designation. Okay, that takes care of that one. So we have our first case up tonight is case 18-13 and 19-20, Millstone Realty Trust and Ledgewood Realty Trust. And just for clarification for procedure, as we discussed at our last meeting, because we are meeting under emergency circumstances online, and we do not have specific and stated instructions to the public on how to provide public input. One of the rules, we'll call it a rule, because those can be overridden. It is recommended by our town legal attorney that we do not render decisions without public input over Zoom or electronic meetings. So this is our first regular meeting, not based on a continuance. We're actually hearing information provided by applicants since the emergency order has occurred. That being said, I will be very cautious in accepting motions, if any, for tonight, well, based on applications, with the possible exception of continuances. Victoria.
I don't know if this is the right time to ask, but I'm not sure when is. But since this has come up, I know the town attorney has made that call. I don't understand it. Is it a matter that there's no way for the public to make comments technically?
Not yet. It's that the public can make comment. We have members of the public participating in this meeting.
Yeah.
The issue is that, James, chime in here if you want. We don't have,
so
go ahead.
I think, and different communities have been handling this in different ways. I think sort of the biggest concern and most obvious potential problem would be, say you have a new case that's accepted as complete or on one night. So you open it and you begin considerations. You have your public hearing that's in a Zoom meeting. People may not be comfortable with the technology to access that in that way, and you act on it in that night. Technically, members of the public had an opportunity to speak. They could have called in, they could have joined via the electronic link, but that may still have created a barrier to people participating. So, that's the most clear cut, it's over and done in one night potential problem. And then sort of as you add meetings for business that you already had going on, that barrier may not be sort of as blatant in terms of preventing people from any opportunity for input, but it does still potentially exist for input. Different communities have resolved that in different ways, but this was the advice that we got from the town attorney at the beginning of this, was not to conduct the public hearings over Zoom, and not to, finalize business. Obviously, we can't finalize business without a public hearing in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So for ongoing business, we're sort of figuring out where that line is and how to walk that. And obviously, as we discussed last time, we had some new business that we've been putting off again, for those same reasons.
Yeah.
So, yeah, other communities and other legal councils have definitely made different decisions, but we're following the advice of our attorney based on our initial inquiry back in March.
Okay.
Okay, I guess I have sort of a similar question because I thought we had made provisions to have input and move these cases along. Is that not the case?
So my understanding of what the board decided at your last meeting was that we were going to start holding meetings in person again to allow some of that in-person testimony that would allow us to finalize things. This meeting is sort of our halfway between what we had been doing and what we are doing or are going to be doing. And I think as a result of that, since we recognize that the hearing room might not be ready for tonight, that in discussing business online tonight, my understanding was that the board did not intend to render a decision on anything tonight. This was for cases where we needed to pick some things back up, or we had information that we needed to take in, discuss, understand, and that we would potentially be rescheduling these items of business for a future meeting, depending on when we felt we would be ready to render a decision.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting old. So I guess I didn't have that same understanding. I thought at this meeting, for example, we were going to, if it was Aroma Joe's, we were going to say, here's the final input from the applicant and so on. And then we were going to ask the public to make their comments before the close of a certain time and date, well in advance of our next meeting. And then we would take that input and deliberate based on that. Do I have that right?
So Hal, I think in part, that is my understanding of where the board is at and intends to be for Aroma Joe's. That next week, that is the only item of business on the agenda. The intent is your policies permitting to meet in person, and where we were in the hearing process for that case was that we were intending for final input from the applicant, final input from abutters. Ideally, all of that would take maybe 30, 45 minutes. And then the public hearing would close, you would deliberate and potentially render a decision. I think for the cases that we put on tonight's agenda, there were cases that I didn't feel were necessarily that one last meeting away. And I think that in sort of discussing them with the board, that was my understanding that most of you were sort of on the same page with that the cases tonight we scheduled for the first meeting so that we could touch base, return to the information, get it fresh in our heads, and potentially resolve some of these at the next meeting after tonight. But that there were things for each of these cases that needed to happen before sort of having complete information. Does that make sense and sound familiar to people? That was my takeaway.
Yeah.
That was my intent as well.
But I thought that I thought we were also intending that at least some of us would be in person for this meeting. So
I think that was
that something I made up in my mind, or?
no, I think that was the ideal situation, but I think the reality is that that might occur between this week and next week, but I don't know that for sure. I mean, on Hal's last meeting with one that I attended at least, we had just received permission to use the meeting or the meeting space with the restrictions that Bob Young and Joe Scruton worked out with staff and whoever.
It's John Scruton.
John Scruton, my apologies. What did I say?
Joe,
Joe, sorry.
a couple times.
Yep.
I have another
I know
question.
Joe Scruton as well. Anyway,
Is it fair to say, because obviously we're trying to figure out a way to make this all work, is it fair to say that in terms of public hearings, that there may be people that would, if they knew how to do it technically, that they might actually feel more comfortable doing it remotely, that we're not gonna, that people may be uncomfortable coming to the town hall. So for us to say we can't have hearings online, maybe that was an assumption, that was an analysis that made sense at some point. And maybe it does now,
Yeah.
but maybe it doesn't. And so I'm just trying to figure out where.
Yeah. So
work also, and a hybrid meeting too. And like, what would that look like? Because I think it's inevitably going to be something like that.
hang on, Susan has a,
I have set up the 23rd and the 16th to be either the Zoom, which I'm not sure how we're going to do yet, but Zoom, and then I put the YouTube link. And then if people are in town hall, we can do live stream too. I don't know, with moving stuff around, I don't know how that's going to affect the microphones, but I think if, I'm going to give you a for instance. So Otsego County in New York has been doing Zoom meetings where the computer is pointed out at the county board. And they must have microphones hooked up to the computers because you can hear them all very clearly. And then the people who aren't there in person are showing up on the screen too. So if we could figure out how to do something like that, then the people who aren't comfortable with coming to the town hall, they could just be on the Zoom, if that's okay, if we can do a hybrid thing.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But I've set all meetings up like that through the end of July. So
I guess I'm of the opinion that we need to come to a resolution on that. This lack of progress is probably, in terms of calls and complaints, the highest on my list as a select board member.
understood.
Not necessarily to diminish some of the other complaints and calls, especially related to building inspection and stuff like that.
that's over. It's all set now.
Yeah, well,
No, trust me.
that's part of the reason why this is worked out. But I think Victoria made an excellent point. If we say, oh, well, you're only going to be able to come in person, then that might eliminate some folks. And if we say, oh, you can only do it by Zoom, that might eliminate some folks. And I guess we need to either make sure that we've got all bases covered or tell people what the situation is going to be. I'm telling you, I'm worried that we're going to get more than just complaints about us not moving things along. Other boards are doing it, and I'm worried for the town about that. So I just encourage the board here to think about that and figure out what we're going to do.
Stratton,
So for people who choose not to attend, we are also strongly encouraging people to submit their comments electronically in writing.
Right.
As a preferable alternative to people being there in person. Because
part of
the
what I
more
was
people
getting
you
at.
have in the room, the higher the risk.
That's what I was getting at.
Well, I do minutes for the town of Durham, and they have been having hybrid meetings for their planning board and ZBA. but ironically, there are 2 or 3 board members present. But very rarely do they get a member of the public coming to the meeting to speak. But they do go out of their way to make sure there's lots of opportunities to speak online. It gets a little awkward sometimes, but they make it work.
Sure.
So
And
it didn't work.
That's my
And-
preferred model, is the
Stratum-
hybrid meeting that we
Stratum
have.
has-
If someone
yeah.
has the ability or wants to come in person, that we can accommodate them. If they want to join electronically, that we can accommodate them as well.
Yep.
I think the information that I've been waiting for or have not yet received is how to accommodate in-person people or in-person meetings. So in the meeting space. Because I'm much more comfortable on the electronic side.
Yeah.
So, but
It seems to me, Bob, if I could
Yep.
say, it seems to me like we've reached some focus here or nexus where the idea of a hybrid, which Victoria brought up on another occasion earlier, and that we've processed that into, we can continue the Zoom. We have now the possibility of some live presence. The bugaboo there seems to be the plexiglass or something equivalent. And that's a doable thing, it appears, from all you've said. And so we seem we're on the verge of accomplishing this in a hybrid form. So I hear a resolution to this in the short term.
I guess the only thing I'd ask is the hybrid meeting maybe is the best, but could we also consider that we say that we're going to conduct business like this and basically ask everybody to put their comments in writing, because that's definite. We know that people can write. They can either use the post office or they can use the email. And by saying that that is your final alternative, as long as we give them sufficient time to do so, I think we need to, set those parameters and move us forward.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
so I would, just so people understand where I'm coming from, I would say, it's very similar to Aroma Joe's. We're going to present information, other folks are going to present information, and then you have a certain amount of time to either show up in public, show up on Zoom, or show up via documentation. But with 3 choices, people should be able to get their input in, and I'm really uncomfortable delaying.
I'm not disagreeing with any of it.
Can I jump in, Bob, and just
Sure.
ask Al? I thought I heard you say that there's been meetings that are taking place in the town hall. Was that correct, or?
I didn't say that, no.
Oh.
I didn't hear that.
Well, I think the concern that I'm feeling is simply that the things that need to be put in place haven't been done yet, and nobody has, I haven't heard a timeline or any type of a email saying here are the steps that need to be followed. Is that's coming through the administrative end? Is that something the selectmen are working on, or what is the status of that?
John published that already.
Oh, he did. I
Yeah.
have yet to see a copy of it.
I haven't seen it, and I'm a staff person.
Well, let me see if I can find it while we're talking.
Yep.
I saw a note from him, and if we need the board to formally approve it, we'll do so, but I thought we did that.
How about the plexiglass and the issue of microphones and all that being separated? So,
Yeah, well, I'm going back to my original point, which is I believe the fallback can always be email and snail mail. And yes,
I'm not talking about the public. I'm talking about the planning board and their staff.
oh, well, we can continue to meet on Zoom if you're uncomfortable. And I probably will too.
But we
What I'm,
can't. You're not approving things.
what I'm hearing is our constraint is the ability to include the public. And I think that constraint can be dealt with by giving people sufficient time to email or snail mail in. That's all I'm saying.
Which goes counter to town legal counsel's recommendation. So that's
They
why-
recommend that we can't, that they have to, did council say that they have to be able to deliver their information and points in person?
No. Town council recommends against conducting business by Zoom.
Well,
So
let
many
me,
other towns are
That's my
doing that.
understanding of it.
I think the
I mean,
biggest barrier, again, was the requirement for a public hearing. We have conducted business where we had like a voluntary merger. That's a letter, all in favor, aye, done.
True.
The biggest barrier, again, is the accessibility and the potential barrier to people giving input. To Hal's point, I think at the last meeting, we put everything on a schedule and we laid out a schedule for if we're going to have new materials from an applicant, it needs to be 10 days before the meeting.
Right.
If we don't have it 10 days before the meeting, we'll read it, we'll do our best, but you can't expect that we will be comfortable acting on new information that comes in later than that.
Right.
We set a similar deadline for members of the public. If you're submitting something in writing, we meet on Thursdays. It needs to be in by close of business the Tuesday before to make sure that it can be distributed to all board members and so that they have time to read it. If it comes in after that, we'll accept it. We'll put it in the file, but the board members may not have the time to adequately consider that information because it came in too late.
if I can add what legal counsel said, because we keep hearing legal counsel said this, legal counsel said that.
Go ahead.
What she said to me was this, and this was several months ago now, back when things were a little bit different than they are right now, but still a lot of it applies. And basically what she said was that she would not recommend. She didn't say you can't do anything. She just said she would not recommend holding public hearings solely on Zoom if there's the potential for access issues by the public to hear or make comments. Now, there's nothing in the statutes as noted by James and what Hal has brought forward about submitting testimony ahead. The only thing that's required is their opportunity to weigh in. It doesn't mean that they have to weigh in every single meeting. You can close the public hearing unless you're allowing more dialogue from the applicant or changing things and they're shut out. But I think that the plan to be able to accept public testimony with a cutoff date and then for the board to go into deliberations, she did not express a concern about that. She was concerned initially when the Zoom started that if somebody couldn't get on Zoom or if there was access issues, that it could potentially set up litigation against a decision of the board. But I think if what's being proposed should be fine. There's nothing about it that should be problematic.
Yeah, I guess that's really what I was getting at, because and maybe I had this wrong, but maybe I just have the cases wrong, because I think James is saying that's exactly what we did for Aroma Joe's. So maybe I should just be quiet and we address the other ones tonight in the same fashion, i.e. input by this date, deliberation by this date. And maybe that would resolve everything. But I guess my problem is, and again, I'll apologize. I thought we were on that path, but I guess not.
I think we're now on that path.
Okay.
Yeah, so to reiterate, I think the things that we put on the agenda tonight were things that we didn't think were going to be resolved at the next meeting.
At this
The
meeting.
things that we
At this
didn't think could be resolved in one. So, in discussing them, I'll be talking through some of the things that I'm seeing, or rather not seeing, that I think we need to get some answers on before I would recommend the board acting on anything. And sort of walk through how I see that playing out. And in your consideration of that, you can think about, okay, is this a quick thing where we just need to check a box and we can definitely act at our next meeting? Or is this something we're going to need to talk about and get more information about? And, when you can choose when you're continuing to, sort of along those lines.
Yeah, I think as long as we set a schedule and stick to it, based on those things, I think people will be happy. And, again, I just want to make clear, a lot of the complaints aren't from the applicants. They're people saying, how can you treat these people so shabbily in terms of dragging things out? So it's not necessarily applicants that are coming to me. It's other folks that are giving me input. So let's just try to be as proactive on this as we can, please.
Okay. That being said, any more discussion on meeting plans, procedures, something to that effect? Have we noticed continuance for the 23rd and the 16th and the 23rd, since we're now at 10 days out, beyond 10 days out for the 16th?
You don't need to notice a continuance.
Continuance. Okay.
That's the point of a continuance.
Well, right, but have we made public, announced whatever the 10-day requirement and the Tuesday requirement for comments? Since that's somewhat of a change, do we have a method of doing that?
It's definitely been made clear to the applicant for Aroma Joe's.
Okay.
And the public should be familiar with that as well, because we had been talking about those
Right.
parallel deadlines back when we were still meeting in person.
Right.
So, to that extent, nothing has really changed with how we've been treating that case.
Okay.
For the 23rd, we have some items of new business for that night. So people will have received or will eventually receive notice for that meeting.
I think if we do things, if we have the opportunity on the town website or on the notice or the agenda,
we could put it with the agenda and things like that. Would probably be relatively easy to do.
Put it up top saying, comments or however you want to phrase it, just so that it's noticeable when it goes out.
Yep.
I mean, I agree with you completely that this is not a new requirement for the 10 days and Tuesdays, at least for Aroma Joe's. But we do need to call attention to that requirement to the public, and again, add in, comments should be submitted electronically or in writing when possible by this deadline. Okay. Anything else on meetings?
So there is a plan,
There is a plan.
but can that be shared with us so we know what it is and we can figure out?
I think Hal's looking for it from John Scruton.
Okay.
And he can email that out if so, and if not, maybe I'll shoot an email to John tomorrow just saying, can you please share status of plans and timeframes?
And I
Okay.
think
Whoops.
something that I would suggest, Bob, is that actually if we are able to meet or have a conference call early next week, I think that would make me more comfortable, just in terms of everybody knowing everything that is out there that we need to understand, everything that we need to follow, everything that we need to set up, what materials we have that we can set up.
Sure.
I think those are some of the details that I don't have any conception of. So I'm finding it difficult to make process recommendations to all of you.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Agreed.
Bob, can I ask Bob a question?
Sure. Go ahead, Joe.
In your technical expertise, is there a way you know or somebody else as to setting up something along the lines, it could be different in fact, but something along the lines that Susan referred to, where microphones are functional while we're doing the Zoom thing at a meeting where we have some people and the microphones are picking up what's going on there.
Yep.
But there's also the Zoom input. Do you have a little clue
I
on
have-
that? Or
I have some ideas on it, but I think what I'll do in the period of time before I don't need the board's authorization because I'm charged with running the meetings anyway, but before the conference call with John and whoever else needs to be involved, James, at least, I will probably be at town hall meeting space if I'm allowed in. I have a key. So that, I can at least take a look and have a good visual idea of what the needs are, if that needs to be conveyed to others. And at that time, I can take a look at the PA system to make that determination as to how we can do it. It should be readily available. I think it's a matter of just tying into Zoom through take the microphone inputs to the PA system and take an output from it into the laptop and set the laptop Zoom as, for that. I haven't done it at town hall, but I think it can be it's technically feasible. So.
As long as you can get an output from the PA system and an auxiliary cable into the laptop.
I think so. I might be such a thing that we don't
get that. If that is the input output, well, we can talk details.
Yeah, we can talk details
just
later.
brought that up.
I want to take a look at it because I'm going by memory and I don't trust it anymore.
Her jaw reset and wired together. When
That's
I went to Allstate, we did a tenor sax duet. She was eating everything through a straw. So she was,
Someone's getting some
Coming on your feed.
and her
Thank you.
brother was the co-star of the senior playbook.
Nope. Still on. I don't know who that is.
She was hot.
Yeah, 95.
Something about a tenor sax.
Okay. Anyway, we ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's pull. Somebody's got their TV on, I think. Or is another. Anyway. Let's move on to case 1813 and 1920, Millstone Realty Trust and Ledgewood Realty Trust, because I know Winnie is here to watch that. And others might be as well. We did receive from the Northwood Conservation Commission, drafted on June 29th, a letter to the planning board outlining their, let's say, concerns and requests of the planning board for this application. That was distributed to planning board back a while ago. I'd have to look at exact dates, but I know it was shortly at the very early days of July. So we should have had a chance to take a look at that. Winnie, are you interested in adding as a representative of the CONSCOM? Do you have any comments on your letter?
Yes, I'm here on they voted me to come, and I did most of the writing of these comments. I don't know if people have had a chance to look them over. Do you want me to run through them? Is that the best way to go? I can do it that way if you want, or if people have specifics.
Does everyone
Victoria?
else have copies? Because I didn't get one. As far as I know, what was
It
the
was,
date?
let me pull the date up.
I believe it was emailed at the end of last week.
Yeah,
Okay. I some reason I'm not seeing it.
I'm going to try to get you the date in a second.
Okay.
It came from Linda.
Yes.
Nope, I got something about Farms for the Future from Linda, but I didn't
It
get.
was the same day. It was the same day as Farms of the Future.
Aha. Okay. Nope, it's not. Nope, I didn't get it. Well, whatever.
I think it was
You
Wednesday,
get-
July 1st.
Yeah,
Did you get other emails that went to planning board all?
I did. And I got the one from Linda, Farms for the Future, but I didn't get
Huh.
anything else.
I can forward it to you. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotta find it. I just sent it to,
Sent Wednesday, July 1st
yeah.
at 22:15. So 10:15 p.m.
Okay.
She was up late.
And it went to the planning board's email distribution.
All right, I just
So
sent
you should have gotten
I
it.
just sent it to, I just sent it. So hopefully it's the same one I forwarded to Joe earlier.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Okay.
Winnie, if you want to, while Victoria's getting a chance to read that, if you want to go over some of your points, maybe a summary, that would be fine.
Okay. The major focus of this is to ensure that the land is in the big woods, and that's the northern lots where that conservation overlay district will be in a suitable condition that a land trust will accept a conservation easement on. And I have 3 bullet points as far as the importance of it, and one being the master plan, the wildlife action plan by Fish and Game saying that this area is highest ranked habitat for wildlife on their 2015 study, and then also reference the 2018 Big Woods Genus Pond region of Northwood and beyond, and how important those areas are. So in reference to that, at the bottom of the page, I'm looking at November 25th, 2019, the ZBA granted a special exception for working in the 20-foot wetland setback, and that was per ordinance Roman numeral 6A4. And this granted the placement of structures which were paving and guardrails in the 20-foot setback. However, if you look at the ordinances, in ordinance Roman numeral 6A5, capital A, 5A, it states where wetland conservation overlay district and the conservation district overlap, or where there exists a prime wetland, which isn't in this case, a 100-foot setback area shall be maintained. No structures shall be constructed within that setback, and vegetation within this buffer shall remain in its natural state. And the Conservation Commission would want to point out that they haven't been granted relief from that. Linda has said that that may require a variance because there are two locations. I don't know if you have maps in front of you, but you have wetland disturbance E over on the east side, lot 18, where they have to actually work in 2 of the 100-foot setbacks in order to make a road from pit A to pit B. And that's about 12,400 square feet of impact. And then the other spot in the overlay district, where they'll be in the 100-foot setback, is wetland disturbance site D, where the road leaves the power and goes off to pit C. And then beyond that, there's a number of things that we talk about that kind of, it addresses the no vegetation and no, that the vegetation stays in its natural habitat. The next 4 bullets kind of refer back to that. Should I stop here for a moment or shall I go on?
Why don't you go on?
Huh?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so looking at that, so talking about that 100-foot wetland setback, and I do want to clarify that on the site plans and the maps that I've seen, the wording, the 100-foot buffer, they keep using the word buffer. And if they were there I'd want to, I'm assuming they're using the word buffer interchangeably with setback. But I'm not sure of that because buffer isn't in the ordinance or in the glossary, and only setback is used there. But I'm presuming they're using that. If you look at the maps, they're using the word buffer and setback in different places. So the bullet points that refer back up to that ordinance, we're asking that these 2 locations, or we would respectfully request that these 2 locations described, that I've just described, is the only 2 areas, the only 2 places in the 100-foot wetland setback where they do any work. And it's kind of redundant, but we kind of wanted to make this very clear. The second bullet, excavation be allowed in the 100-foot wetland setback, and that you ask of the applicant, there are many places where the 100-foot setback buffer line comes through outcrops that will presumably or can only be partially excavated. In other words, the outcrops are part in that 100-foot setback and part out of it. And that will take some, I don't know much about blasting, but it would, you know, asking the blasting applicant, how can they do that without having rocks flying into the 100-foot setback and avoid the necessity of having to go into the 100-foot setback, you know, between that line and the wetland to get rocks, to retrieve them, which will be detrimental to that area.
I'm going to hold you there for 1 second, Winnie.
Sure.
Susan, would you do me a favor and could you mute the person on whose phone number is in at 2212?
That's me.
That's Linda.
Oh, that's Linda. I'm sorry. Never mind.
I'm gonna mute Galaxy S8 unless it's somebody.
It was I was getting feedback and I didn't realize it was Linda. My apologies. Never mind. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Winnie.
Okay,
My
Actually,
Wi-Fi, so
I don't
had to
know if
go
you
on
all
my
have,
phone.
sorry. I don't know if you all have your sets of maps in front of you, but I can show you on a map what I'm talking about.
That would be great, Whitney. Could
Yeah,
you do
can
that?
do you want me
click
to?
Can you allow her to share the screen?
I think I have everybody is allowed. Oh,
Okay.
yep. Yep, okay.
That up and share. Oh. Host disabled attendee. Whoops. Let me try that again. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay. Susan,
Give
you'll
me a
have to
minute.
allow it.
Let me see. Oh, okay. All right, you should be good now.
Yep. Let's see if I can bring this up. Okay. Can you all see
Uh-huh.
that?
I can.
I can.
Okay. This is part of Pit B. And this down here is Pit A. I'm sorry. Okay, this is Pit A. And you can see the red is here's the wetland, and here's the 100-foot buffer. Sorry, setback, 100-foot setback. And so this is where they're going to be excavating. And you can see here that if you can see closely, the topography lines, they go right through. So literally part of this outcrop could be excavated, but they'll have to do something to keep this intact because it's in the setback. Same along in here, okay? Again, the red is where the 100-foot setback extends to. And here is an outcrop as well. And so they can excavate this, but here, what happens, we're asking, okay, how are they going to keep rocks from flying toward the wetland? And then if they want to use those rocks, they'd have to go into this, what the ordinance says is a no vegetation change area to get the rock. And I have other areas, but you see what I mean? Okay, and that's not just here, it's in a number of places.
So having looked at, and I will qualify my statement by saying I have a degree in engineering, but I am not a licensed engineer. And I think you pointed it out later in your meeting, or in your letter, is that best management practices for blasting be provided. The method that I would imagine is to be used, again, it's not my place to say, is that the blasting mats, once the holes are drilled and the charges are placed, they get covered by these very thick rubber mats so that any chips or rocks are contained underneath them, because they're in the same, that's product, that's what they want to sell. So I'm sure they don't want to retrieve those. They don't want to have them flying in there to begin with. They want to keep them all where they can access them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if possible, that's something that the applicant's engineer can detail.
Okay. And this is a map pretty much of the whole area. And I've outlined here, 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 and some over here. This is Pit C. Okay. So just for, an overview of most of the plan. Okay. I think that's it there. So in order, I think they'll probably do number 4, the bullet for number 4 in that section, but
50-foot setback flagging.
Yeah, the
flagging. 50-foot flagging.
Right, about every 50 feet. Even when they're logging, if the ordinance in question above, they should be careful from, it sounds as if they're restricted from logging in that area too, according to the ordinance anyway. But anyhow, 50 feet before logging, or obviously before excavation, and then asking that they follow the best management practices for erosion control on timber harvest operations. Which is often is recommended in timber harvests.
Okay.
And then just going further than that, it kind of follows. Some of this is redundant, but that all blasting and excavation be confined to in the pits and not allowed elsewhere on the land, the lots that are in the big woods. 214, 15, 16, and 17. Mostly it's 214, 16, and 17. As far as the stumps, I'm not sure what they're going to be doing. I know they're being stockpiled. The stumps to be ground and removed because burying can cause water pollution and a sinkhole hazard potentially. If stumps are spread over the land during restoration, it may jeopardize the easement and the use, we presume, for the conservation easement might be recreation as well, but that's a long way off.
Is that, and let me ask about that. How is the source of water pollution the disturbance because they're burying them with soil? Or is
No,
it?
there are actual pollutants in, I don't have a flyer on that, but there
That's
are
okay. I'll take
pollutants
your word for it.
from the rotting stumps. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I have a pile here somewhere, but there is water pollution that can occur from that.
And then the jeopardization of the easement by piling stumps on the land is that they are what is the detriment to the potential for the easement by doing that?
Well, it depends on what the wording is going to be from Mr. Dodd. That this, and in the ordinance, it states that they will return the property to as close as they can to the original, and they're going to be putting back the overburden, and I think the one of the plans, the AOT, requires plantings of some sort.
Right.
It's probably more of a visual type of thing, but if you're trying to move around, and one of the functions, the purpose district is recreation, that can make a problem.
Okay.
They could have someone come in. I mean, I don't want to go beyond what I'm just going to stay with this. I don't want to get something off the top of my head because
Sure.
I'm just following this.
That's fine.
On the
I
last-
wanted to get an idea of what the hesitation was or the reservation was for putting stumps down.
Right.
So if it's that it jeopardizes easement because of recreation or the function of the permitted uses of the easement land.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
On the last page of the next bullet next to there are black gum trees that have been identified in a large wetland there that was evaluated during our prime wetland study. It's not a prime wetland, it's in the center. It's right in lot 16. There are some others on the land, and perhaps the Natural Heritage Bureau will document these. They have to do a study that has to be submitted for the the plan to DES. But we would like, if possible, to see that the black gum trees, some of these are over 300 years old. I was out there within the time that the ZBA was doing their deliberations and did some measuring of some of the trees. So that's older than the town itself. So it would be to have a focus on that when they're looking at natural features. And that is mentioned in the, I looked it up today. I know this is a minor site plan, and this 7A5M, I could only find it listed in the major site plan. So if it's in a minor site plan, that may not happen. But I did read through the site plan regs today.
Good for you.
Yeah. And then there are some recommendations we saw from a letter from the Wetlands Board, and they're doing they had some recommendations for roads. I don't know if you see that, but they had some requirements related to road construction, restoration, and a work schedule. And that might be something that the planning board might want to see what they recommended before making your final decision. Something you normally do, but anyhow, we probably would put that in there because there was some specifics on roads and crossings. There is a concern about water. This is the third from the last little paragraph. Some sort of having a hydrogeologist or someone, so there's some kind of baseline. I don't know if they did anything like that for what they've already done, the quarry area near Route 4. But I do want to strongly point out that this has been no bedrock aquifer study in the Big Woods. There has been determined that there's no stratified drift aquifer in the area, but there's no bedrock aquifer evaluation that's been done in the big woods. It has been done in other parts of the town, obviously for the water district. That's a bedrock aquifer that we get our water from. So some sort of baseline water quality and somehow of tracking potential contamination due to blasting. I don't know if the blasting company has anything there, but we wanted to put something in water quality be monitored and safeguarded because one of the potentials for the big woods under the COD, it basically talks about, you know, having that as a water supply, a future water supply. In order, this is a huge ecological impact to a conservation overlay district, and because they are working in that kind of special area, that the planning board, Linda guided us through this, hiring the town engineer to conduct a third-party review with more checks than what is normally due during the excavation and restoration to see that these, you know, like that 100-foot setback is being protected. And again, so that at the end here, the suitable condition for a conservation easement, and also kind of upholding the purposes and values of the conservation overlay district, that you might consider having that. And then Linda said that I guess Mr. Dacco and Mr. Holden will be, it's up to them to propose conservation easement language, and we could see that and provide any comment to see what, if that would be possible.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions from Ms. Young from the board or staff?
I'd like to throw one out, Bob, just for clarification. I thought your points the Conservation Commission made when you were reasonable in trying to see to it that the basic setbacks and their purpose was being honored. I just this is regarding just the way you expressed something early on, or was in the what was it, the letter from the Conservation Commission, and that was, and you referred to it just early on. You referred to a conservation easement, and that it be going forward into the future, that it be acceptable to a land trust. And I was wondering, has there been some previous intention that this go into a land trust? Is this just the way you put that? Is this just recognizing there might be a possibility or of a land trust, or is there already something intended that I didn't pick up on?
I think James wants
James, go ahead. You're muted.
Me?
No, James is.
Yeah, Joe, the applicant has expressed on the record that their intent is to conserve the land once it is reclaimed. So they do their blasting, they finish their blasting, they do their plan to reclaim the land. Once they've done that, their intention is to put it into conservation. And I think that, at least in recent history, it has seemed to be practice in Northwood that the town doesn't want to take those easements or take those properties fee simple. It's typically left to some sort of private conservation organization, whether that's something like Bear Paw or the Southeast Land Trust, or a larger organization like the Wildlife Conservancy or the Nature Conservancy or Fish and Game. But typically the town is not the entity that accepts the responsibilities of that easement. So what Winnie's referring to is essentially having the land be in a condition that these other organizations who are the most likely to take it on in the future be willing to do so.
Okay. So I got you. It's not necessarily a specific reference to a future land trust, but it's a likely situation that's that would develop.
Yeah, so I'm going to draw a parallel to another case we have on the agenda tonight, the cerebral development case. So in that case, we had somebody come in and say, I'm making this parcel of land and I'm going to put an easement on that. And they never did. So when this case came back to us this year, we said, okay, we have the ability to enforce, go ahead. We have the ability to enforce that land will be conserved because they said on the record that is the intent. But we needed to get the mechanism for conserving that, the easement or the deed restriction in place. So right now, what we're looking at with this process is we have the applicant saying now, today, I'm putting a future conservation restriction on this. It will be legally binding if you approve this excavation with that as a condition that land will be conserved in the future. But we don't anticipate actually putting that mechanism into place, that conservation easement into place, until reclamation has happened, because we need to be able to look at the property and what it's suitable for before we write up the easement details. We don't want to have a future easement and say this will be the language and people can go out there and hike, and find out in 30 years that it really isn't safe for people to go out there and hike. Flip side, we don't want to say under no circumstances can anybody conduct agriculture, and 30 years from now, it actually seems reasonable to reclaim that as a hayfield, and there's a strong need and desire for that kind of access. So we are, or at least what the board has talked about previously, is leaving some of that open for the future to finalize. And we're trying to figure out what the best way of recording those conditions is. So if there are specific things that you do want to enable, you can certainly say so as part of this approval and say any future easement shall allow for or shall not allow for certain things. But we also had previously discussed leaving some of that flexibility.
James, may I jump in here for a minute also?
Yes, go ahead, Hal.
I think the other thing, and James made some excellent points, so thank you, James. I think the other thing to think about, and we have an example of this, is how closely do we need to specify the type or mechanism of the easement? James, you mentioned a couple organizations that might consider conserving the land. We also have cerebral Chris Meyer.
Yes.
We have his development, which has a little bit different approach. It's the land is, I don't know if that's officially conserved, but it's basically the neighbors that control or vote and do whatever is appropriate to make sure that the land stays the way it should. In
that case, it's essentially a deed restriction in favor of, it doesn't sound like they're making a formal neighborhood association, but it's essentially that kind of thing where the neighborhood association or the neighbors who own it are responsible for it.
Right. And the reason I bring this up is, at least as of right now, I'm not sure you would necessarily have the right capacity to do something like that in that area. I mean, it's possible you might be able to work something out, but people may not be willing to participate. and I think we need to anticipate that. On the flip side, some of the organizations you mentioned, I should say, pretty much to my knowledge, every organization you mentioned will ask for different levels of fees for the work to conserve it. They'll ask for funds to, check the easement and make sure, take care of the easement, so to speak, in perpetuity. And those aren't, like 3-digit or 30 or in some cases 40 numbers. They're a big number. So, I think we have to be a little bit careful about how we play this, recognizing that this is way in the future, and our ability to anticipate things is going to be limited.
But I think that's Winnie's point, is that or I should say not Winnie's, but Conservation Commission's point is that, at least the way I'm reading it, is that the applicant, as part of the reclamation, should leave the land, not meeting just the letter of the reclamation plan as per the RSA, but as well leave it appealable. Is that a word? Appealable? Appealing to.
We know what you mean, Bob.
Appealing to the potential land trust holders.
Yeah, and I again, I don't mean to harp on this, but the fees, they're not insignificant, and I don't know whether that needs to be factored into a bond or something. I mean, I don't obviously want to add extra burden on folks unnecessarily, and oftentimes these things are worked out, or grants are gotten and stuff like that. That's why I say it's so hard to predict the future. I mean, it could be that whenever this is done, there could be all kinds of grants, especially for this area. So, to burden somebody with a bond or something when maybe it's not realistically required, let's just say this is a conundrum for me. So let's just be real careful about how we do it.
It's not something that, I talked to SPNF, Forest Society and stuff. This is nothing that anybody's done before. So they as far as setting any specifics, as far as what will be allowed, it can't be done. We're going to have to just trust that Commission and the applicant at that time will get together, but just some kind of wording that says, yes, this will be done. Whatever the wording needs to be that says it will be something that is expected when the restoration reclamation is done. We're not looking for specific language, the conservation.
Yeah. And Winnie, would maybe at least some language in there to say that they would, or maybe I forgot what I read in there, but that they would work with the Conservation Commission to define those terms at that time?
I think that's my understanding of it.
I'm expecting that.
We as planning board, CONSCOM, can say this is what we want to include when the language is drafted, as to James's point, but we want to allow enough flexibility for changes in the next 30 years or whatever the time frame is.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was more referring to, would the wording include that would be, again, I'm not a lawyer, but mutual agreement by the landowner and the Conservation Commission, or can't we bind them that way? What I'm worried about is it becomes a free-for-all with, no meaningful input received from the Conservation Commission.
I don't think you want to have a condition on it that, other than that the property owner would have to, they would have to provide a conservation easement. It would be up to the property owner, whether it's 30 or 50 years from now, to achieve it at that point in time. to say that you can't build in anything other than an administrative decision. You can't build in a discussion that hasn't occurred yet.
Yeah, I guess, Linda, that's what I was trying to go for. You don't think we can build in that this would be, the conservation easement would be subject to review, discussion by the Conservation Commission?
Oh, I don't
Well,
think
but
that can happen. I don't think there's any need for it. I think whatever the property owner has to do at that point in time to be able to get a conservation easement on the property and find an entity at that point in time that's willing to accept the monitoring of that easement. And it's really not the responsibility. If there's a need to do that and the applicant has said that they are willing to do it, it's not the planning board's responsibility to be concerned whether or not there's a cost factor involved. Yes, obviously you can be to some degree, but that's like saying, well, you know, about any site plan.
Sure. But
So I think for the points to consider, so if we were putting that conservation easement in place now today, the planning board, if it was done as a condition of this application, would have input. But I think if we're thinking those 30 years potentially down the road, the thing that really is going to matter at that time is the applicant finding an organization that's willing to take it, and the easement is going to need to be written to that organization's satisfaction. We could include a requirement that the planning board and or conservation commission have input in case there was that organization was amenable to accommodating things the town wanted to see happen on that land. But by leaving this to the future, the essential relationship is going to be between the applicant and the conserving organization. And the people who need to be satisfied at that time are going to be the conserving organization. Now, if they don't do it, then that's a compliance issue with the town, and the town can make them do it. So to your point on the financial end, I think that could potentially be something to consider alongside all of the other aspects of the reclamation. That, okay, if in 20 years, say Mr. Daco sells this to somebody else, and then they decide, you know what, we don't care, we're just going to stop paying taxes, and the town ends up taking the property. That's what the reclamation bond is there for. So the town can call that bond and restore the site. If we were at sort of phase 3 and we're getting close to putting that in conservation, and the town was looking at itself, at protecting itself from getting the land reclaimed and then getting the land conserved, we may need to discuss whether to or how to require bonding that would cover completion of that intended conservation so that the town wouldn't have to fit the bill for that.
Well, I guess if the town owns, oh, I'm sorry, Victoria, go ahead.
go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Well, I saw her raise her hand as I was speaking, so I didn't want to.
Well,
I know.
I was gonna bring up something else, so maybe you want to finish what you were discussing.
Hal, yeah, go finish your statement.
Well, at this point, I forgot what it was. She might as well go.
Okay, go ahead, Victoria.
I'm looking at the two next to last paragraphs, so about the hydrogeological study. to get the baseline water quality and third-party review. Could you refresh my memory about, has any of this been done for the first project? Is there baseline water quality data? And if not, does the Conservation Commission have a concern about this issue in particular, or is this just to be on the safe side?
I don't know about what happened with the first one. I don't know if there's any kind of water quality testing with the current quarry areas. Does anybody know what's been done there?
Wow. I don't recall. I know there was stormwater issues, but I seem to recall, and don't quote me on this because I'm going by memory, that any water wetlands or water quality issues were, I don't believe there's any wetlands issues with the existing quarry. But I don't believe there was any baseline water study done beforehand.
I mean, this would kind of follow, because it's in a conservation overlay district, we're going to follow the idea that one of the purposes of the conservation overlay district is protection of underlying aquifers. And of course, we're not sure if there's any bedrock aquifers out there. We know there's no, sand and gravel, stratified drift, whatever. But I'm not, so I don't know. Out there, because it's in the conservation overlay district, it's something that people should be a bit concerned about. And a future source.
Okay.
If I could just add, the project out in the front is very small in comparison to the size of the proposal. And again, I think the important issue is that, well, there was a drainage report and there was stormwater that had to be put in place, stormwater management, but the part that the Conservation Commission is concerned about is the Conservation Overlay District, which the front part is not in.
Right.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was any baseline water quality data.
No, there isn't.
I don't recall any, but again, going by memory, when I have to look through my records.
I would also throw out there that to a certain extent that would depend, or what would be produced. The process would depend on what water quality you're talking about. If the board was interested in hearing from the blasting contractor, they might be able to explain some of the precautions that would typically need to be taken for residential wells. I know when Dover did their waterfront development when I was on the planning board, there was a lot of discussion about the bluff that they were going to have to excavate beforehand. And the blasting contractor explained to us at that time, what opportunities there were for abutting homeowners. They had their foundations surveyed to make sure that there was a clear before condition and after condition. My understanding is that same process would have included an assessment of private wells if there were any. It just happens that that entire area of Dover is on city sewer. And that's something that I don't have a thorough understanding of. So if you're interested in learning more about what other review agencies require in that regard, like I said, the applicant's blasting contractor would probably be the best person to give you that information. My understanding is that none of that would necessarily look at, water quality in a natural area that wasn't used for human consumption.
Great.
So would the blasting company, would that be in their plan, or would they come before the planning board to answer some of these things, or would they be
You could
sent
request it.
questions?
Like I said, I have seen an application that was before a planning board that I was a member of, and they brought the blasting contractor to answer questions. And I would say that if the board is interested, it is within your purview to request additional information, and that could include, please have your blasting contractor or a blasting contractor, if you haven't signed on for who's actually doing the project, get somebody to represent you for this process and explain to us what has to happen with the blast and what the best management practices are. This is probably the fourth excavation project that I've had some relationship to in the review process. And I think the ones that have been easy had some of that information from the blasting contractor, or the ones that have been harder to get through the review process have just said, well, that's for the blasting contractor to figure out, and haven't provided that information.
Well,
So that's something for you all to think about, whether you want that information or not.
okay. Well, based on the CONSCOM letter, the first of the four bullet points, the third one, that the blasting company provide an explanation of how the fracturing of rock will be avoided in the 100-foot wetland setback. That's a question that a blasting company could be asked of and provided in writing or email or whatever, or in person if we choose to do so. One of the questions I have for the applicant or representative or blasting company, as Winnie pointed out in her screen share, is that if the 100-foot setback of wetlands runs over ledge or an outcropping of ledge, if let's make the assumption that we approve the excavation contract in this application, and that they are allowed to remove part of that knob, if that is being blasted, how can the blasting contractor prevent the blast or the fracturing of ledge beyond the 100 feet? Now, is that something that they need to, best management practices is to say, okay, we're not going to set any charges more than I'm pulling numbers out here, we set them no more than 120 feet back. So that if there is a fracture, there's a 20-foot buffer that doesn't get close to that. I don't know if that's reasonable or not to ask. So, James?
So the way I'm interpreting the plans and the statements that have been made are that, where Winnie showed us those very close together end lines, that is intended to be either a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 slope. So they're blasting at the bottom, and then they are not blasting, that's probably going to be more excavator or fill of material to establish that slope up to the top. That's then intended to be no disturb at the setback line.
Okay.
As far as how do you make sure that there are no cracks or crumbles or accidentally go too far, I don't know. That is a question for the applicant for how that's going to work. But that is how I'm interpreting what I'm seeing here, is that the excavation is not actually going right up to that line. The excavation is more down in the outer area to allow that gradual slope down into the pit.
Okay.
The other thing that I've been meaning to hop back to, and because we've made our way back around to the 100-foot buffer, I'll take this opportunity.
Glad to help.
So the Conservation Commission has brought to your attention that there are wetland impacts in the 100-foot setback buffer. Our ordinance does sort of use those terms interchangeably as well, even though only one is defined. And the way the wetland conservation overlay district is set up, the ordinance provides for permitted uses and uses that are allowed by special exception in one section of the overlay. So, that's for things that are in the overlay proper. They're actually in that wet area. And then the setback section is separate from that. And the setback section has an A paragraph and a B paragraph. And the B paragraph then has some language about how you get a special exception for impacts to the wetland buffer, similar to how you would get a special exception to the wetland overlay district itself. The A paragraph is the one that has where the wetland conservation overlay and the conservation overlay district overlap. That setback is 100 feet, not 20. And there is no mention of special exception there. So essentially, we have a situation where the ordinance is a little bit murky, and the way it's laid out isn't super clear about whether those provisions for special exception under B are meant to apply under A as well or not. So with where this is in the process, procedurally, I think that is something that essentially needs a zoning determination to say either yes, the permission that you've already granted includes those small impacts to the 100-foot buffer, setback buffer, or no, those permissions that you were granted only cover things in the 20-foot setback. A special exception is not the appropriate mechanism for granting approval to impact the 100-foot setback. Therefore, you either need to get things out of the 100-foot setback or you need to go back to the ZBA for a variance. Because there is an application in front of you that you are considering, you are the people that get to make that zoning determination. If this was somebody coming in, hadn't filed an application, and they were just saying, hey, I'm ready to build my paved driveway, we'd send them to the building inspector. But we've had this discussion before, since this is something that is a part of a site plan application that you are considering, you have the ability to interpret the zoning ordinance as it relates to that application. So that is a decision for you all to make as to whether they have to go back to the ZBA or whether you think that the existing ZBA permissions are enough. It's typically understood that the planning board can only approve things that comply with the zoning ordinance. So, and since we're already in process, I think this would be one of those situations where I would say your options are either you as a board determine it does comply, or I would suggest that if you're otherwise willing to approve this, that a condition of approval be approval of a variance or a special exception to impact the 100-foot buffer as needed. But since we're this far into the process, I would not suggest stop everything. You have to go back to ZBA because that would extend what has already been a very lengthy review process. So does that make sense? Are there questions about that and the logistics of that, or what I'm asking of you?
That's clear. I have a question or
Go ahead,
a thought.
Victoria.
I'm looking at the ordinance wording as James described, and for A, it's where the Wetland Conservation Overlay District and the Conservation Area Overlay District overlap, and which seems to be a pretty important area. And maybe that's why there wasn't the special exception opportunity, whereas under B, there's more flexibility. So that's just one possible way to interpret it.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, if there are questions or people want to talk through things, go ahead. I would suggest that we not reach a decision on that tonight to give people time to go home, read up, think about some things, since I just brought it up on the call. But yeah, that's definitely something to talk through about what the intent of that section is, how it's supposed to work, how relief is intended to be granted, all of that.
And I just mentioned that if that decision is made to go ahead and assume that that ZBA ruling covers the 100-foot, can the things that we put down that we suggested still be in place about what happens in the 100-foot wetland setback while they're working in it? Like the 4 bullet points under, it'll be the middle 4. 2 locations described above be the only locations where work is allowed. Those 4 are there. Could you consider, even if you make that ruling, that those 4 things, those bullet points are still, could still be in place, could still?
So I think the requirement that or placing a condition that the only areas where the 100-foot buffer can be impacted, I think that requirement is superfluous, because that is the only place they were allowed, because that's the only place they've gotten permission to do it, if that's how the board interprets it. But we have in the past put, conditions that are technically superfluous for the purpose of making sure that information is given to the applicant. So if the board wanted to see that as either a note in the plan set to make sure that, all of the contractors who are potentially working on this understood that down the road, or if that's something you want to put into a notice of decision, we can definitely have that conversation as well.
Okay, I would just like you to reconsider those after you make that decision.
Okay. And this is going to be it's not a segue, but a interjection. Since this is an official meeting, Susan, do we have minutes being taken for this? Are we going to work off the recording?
We've
I
had
am going
minutes for
to-
every one of these cases.
I mean, yeah,
Or
I have
every one of these meetings.
minutes for tonight, yes.
Yes. Okay. Just double checking.
Sorry, it took me a minute to
Nope, that's okay.
unmute.
That's okay. Thank you. Sorry.
And even after the live stream on YouTube is over, this video will still be on YouTube for people to watch after the fact, right?
Right.
know
YouTube's been going the whole time, so.
I know it's been recording. It's more that I wanted to.
Actually, I did the YouTube first and then,
Yes.
so that's there, yeah.
Regardless, it's a matter of whether I need to make my own notes or we can refer on to the minutes. So that's, this is.
I will get the minutes done
Yep.
in 5 days.
Okay. Okay. I would like to take a look at the wetlands regs that are mentioned and dig out my site plan maps just to take a look at this before, as well as following the recommendations of town council, not to necessarily make a decision tonight on this.
Can we get an electronic copy, the one that Winnie showed us?
Oh, of the site
Oh, the
plan?
letter?
Yeah. site
Oh,
plan.
the site plan? We should have a copy of that. If we don't have the current copy, we'll ask for it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. What I would like to make a determination of, because I think we'll be safe in that and it's only fair to the applicant, are we at a point where we want to hear from the blasting contractor on the points that Conscom has raised?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't feel as strongly about that. I mean, I think they're excellent points, but I'm not sure that it would change anything in terms of what we ask of the applicant. You know, if they say that, or if the Conservation Commission is saying, look, we need to be careful about this, and we need to make sure we don't throw all kinds of crap into the wetlands, then I think you have to delegate that to the blasting company. And if they have to use mats, if they have to use special explosives to limit which way it goes and things like that, they just need to do it. I don't think us trying to, personally, I don't think us trying to figure out the best way for them to do it is appropriate.
That's not the intent.
No,
Oh,
That's not the intent. The intent is, I think, you know, Victoria, chime in if I'm misinterpreting you. I think the intent is to educate the board on the methods that they can use to prevent this.
yeah,
How about a suggestion in that regard? What if we just heard a review of best practices as they would apply in this kind of situation of blasting from some reputable source?
but if we could just hear, we could hear from the applicant some specifics on what the blasting plan would be, like what kind of a plan is there in a situation like this as compared to when there are a bunch of houses around, you know, how we just need more specifics on the blasting plan.
That would be good.
I'm going to tell you, I'm really leery of that. Ultimately, because if we discuss it and we sound like we're in agreement, and then 20 years from now, when they go to blast part C and things have changed and they need to do some things differently, they'll refer back to the notes and say, well, it was discussed and, you know, it was part of the approval because that was part of what we said. I personally am a firm believer in saying, these are the requirements, you just damn well better meet them.
Yeah, but it's really good for us to understand what they are. And it's about
No,
communication about what's involved. And so
but what do we care?
what are we afraid of?
Well, here,
I don't
let me
really-
just,
I don't really care what they have to do. If they need to spend a ton of money to do it the way the Conservation Commission wants it, that's their risk.
Well, it's not our decision, but
Mr. Chair?
go ahead, Joe.
Well, let me just reiterate. I think what I'm suggesting is a little bit of a bridge between Victoria and Hal. If we'd like to know a little more, just to understand, we've referred to best practices here a couple of times. It's not that we need a complete course in the engineering of this, but just a quick overview of what best practices might entail in this particular geography. I mean, we don't need to know for all such circumstances, but what would be the best practices in this regard? I think that might give us a sense and not obligate somebody to, as Hal is saying, to some future scenario, because that won't be up to us. But I think a little understanding of best practices might, perhaps, I don't know if Victoria can speak for herself, but might put a little more at ease in our thinking here.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. Even just not an in-depth blasting plan, but something even on paper that just kind of spells it out. It's just information. It's good information to have.
If I can add something,
Go ahead, Linda.
back along when there was a prior application, which eventually was withdrawn, Mr. Daco did have some folks come in and they gave the board an overview of the process. So the board understood how it was going to be done. I don't think it's out of the ordinary. He did it when he was going to do a different project with a different outcome,
Okay.
different board.
Myself, I don't expect a contractor to appear in person if we can ask questions or they have documentation to say this is how we do it.
Right.
I think it's more a chance for us to learn a little bit more about the process. That we
and I don't want to. It is possible that Mr. Daco and or Mr. Holden feel comfortable speaking to some of these aspects themselves. In the cases that I had done previously, the operator themselves didn't feel comfortable doing it, so they brought the blasting company. But if Mr. Holden feels comfortable coming in and talking about blasting best practices for the purpose of assuring the board that yes, we can in fact get as close to the boundary as we've shown it and control that we're not going to go past it accidentally. Yes, we can do this without impacting wells, and here is how neighboring property owners would be able to get wells tested or not, depending on how far away they are. I think what you should be thinking about in this is not dictating how and where the blasting occurs with what materials or anything like that, to Hal's point. But what you will need to make a decision on is, can this be done safely without negative impacts to abutters, without permanent impacts to the environment that would hinder the ability to get a full reclamation and or conservation easement in the future. So, you know, feel free to ask as many questions as you want, but keep in mind what you are actually charged with determining, and what you should not be making sort of micromanaging decisions about.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Exactly.
Al, does that make you feel a little bit better?
Well, let me ask it a different way. You mentioned a couple things about decisions. Can you sort of specifically give an example or two as to what types of things we would do with the information in terms of specific decisions? Because I'll just say again, I'm very happy with what the Conservation Commission did. And, you know, in terms of the blasting company, if they can't meet it by going right up to the line, then they need to move back. They just need to meet the conditions.
Well, so for example, if the plan is currently showing a 2-to-1 slope at the edge, and I don't want to be, you know, planting seeds or ideas in people's heads. This is an example, but you know, say you look at that and say, okay, you're right at the line on the top, and you're showing a 2-to-1 slope. Are you actually able to excavate that out of the bottom and make that happen safely? And tell me right now that if we approve this, there's not going to be, you know, an accident that, you know, you're just blowing huge chunks of hillside off. I think, you know, my understanding is that typically they can take off fairly small amounts. But if you're not sure and you want to understand at least enough of the methodology to say, yes, a 2-to-1 slope is suitable, that's something you can ask about. If you didn't feel that it was suitable, a different decision you could make would be to require a 3-to-1 slope. And that has to come further towards the center of the pit so that it's more stable, more gradual, and they're not getting as close to the edge.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but ultimately, if they can't meet the conditions, then they got to change what they're doing.
Well, I'll counter you, Hal, in that somewhat, in that it's also incumbent on us to inform ourselves that to what the current state is. If it's not possible to blast or excavate in a 2-to-1 slope at all, it's ridiculous for us to impose that. If they can't meet, if Conscom can make recommendations and requests for what's possible or what they would like to see. If it's not at all possible, given the state of technology, to meet that, then we're setting ourselves up in conflict already.
Yeah, I understand that, but let me try it a different way so you can see where I'm coming from. If the Conservation Commission is saying, look, we don't want rocks flying into the wetlands. And maybe with the current technology, they can do that using the 2-to-1 slope. But maybe in the future, there's limits in terms of what kind of things you can do and all that kind of stuff. And they find out to keep the rocks out of the wetland, got to use a 10-to-1 slope. Well, then they just got to use the 10-to-1 slope to meet the Conservation Commission's conditions.
If they were actually changing the topography, if they were actually changing the topography of the reclamation like that, they'd have to come back to you to change the reclamation plan.
Right. So I think we're trying to predetermine stuff and we're going to get locked in on something that we're not happy with. That's all I'm saying.
But you also don't want to have things in conflict with each other.
Exactly.
If one thing can't happen, if the other thing does, then you're setting yourself up for a conflict.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, can I interject something here?
Yes, go ahead, Joe.
One of the things, I mean, I think we're talking apples and oranges here in terms of in our limited expertise. You brought up earlier, and I think it was a valid point, that as far as, for instance, rocks, and it's a reasonable concern that I understand the Conservation Commission, and it's a good point. If they're, and we're not talking little baseball-sized rocks, but if you're talking large chunks that can go flying, they would want to be retrieved or should be retrieved because they're changing the buffer area and further into the wetlands area. But so that's a recognizable concern. But as you said, and anybody that's watched blasting, or you can watch it on YouTube if you don't want to go up near one of these. I had some going on just down the street from me. But these large mats are used, as you expressed, and it very much controls. We're talking, I watch blasting that's right next to another house, virtually. The mats control where those rocks go, and they don't go really anywhere. They're all underneath the mat when the explosives go off. So, as far as that's one issue, and I think you dealt with it, Bob, in just your expression there, and it's a valid one from my own observation, and I think the little I know about it, and I think that would be satisfied. But the slope issue is an entirely different one. It has nothing to do with the way the blasting's done. That's a condition that we're either agreeing to or not, as to the friendliness of what remains. That is a slope that's too steep. Is not going to be maybe even stable to begin with, or usable in the future conservation use of this land. So I think the 2-to-1 suggestion I don't know if you know what that I think that calculates to about a 30% slope. But if you go more shallow a slope, 3 to 1, well, okay, so be it. But you're maybe asking for something that's unnecessary for the lay of the land. You know, where you have steep ledges already. And as I looked at the what do I want to say? The
Prints?
what?
The prints? The blueprints?
Yeah. Well, no. As I looked at the, I'm trying to think of the right term. Contours.
Oh.
As I looked at the contours, there's some very steep, much steeper than any 2 to 1, 3 to 1, or whatever. I mean, it's literally a very sharp drop off, and some of that it's ledge areas or very steep naturally. So anyway, if the 2 for 1 is acceptable, so be it. Whether that's stable, we could question that again if you want, but that strikes me as a stable scenario. In terms of an aesthetic, if you want 3 for 1, 4 to 1, or you know, you can go through any scenarios you want. I think that's asking for too much, and as somebody pointed out, that pushes whoever's doing this work way back into the center of the work area, which probably doesn't make sense to them. Anyway, that's my 2 bits on that. As again, it's apples and oranges, slope versus where rocks might fly in terms of blasting.
Okay. I know I have questions for a blasting company. I think offhand, where was it? The statement on the third of 4 in the middle bullet points, we suggest that the best management practices for blasting be provided. You know, that statement included in a note somewhere would cover, I think, a lot of what we're asking. I think what I am curious about myself is what those best management practices are. And, you know, Hal's point is well taken. If we don't want, or Conscom doesn't want, and planning board agrees that we don't want what excavated rocks impinging on the 100-foot setback, that it's up to the blasting company to require to meet that.
Yeah, I guess if we're going to get the input and stuff and put that stuff in, that's fine. I just ask that we make sure that we aren't somehow limiting ourselves in terms of what we can hold the applicant to. That's all I ask.
And I think that's what we could hold them to, would be follow the best management practices for blasting and don't impinge at all on the 100-foot setback.
I think that, since we're talking about potentially, 20, 30, 50 years of this project, we can require that they put or deliver a copy of the best management practices they intend to follow prior to excavation, and then any subsequent changes need to be filed with the town before they can go into effect. It could be as simple as you always have to tell us what you're going to do. If it's industry standards and the industry standards change and you are following industry standards, fine.
Yeah, that's my intent.
You have to just give us the document.
Yeah, it's sort of like the fire code, I guess, James.
Yes.
You know, some of the stuff we talk about now wasn't ever in the fire codes 30, 40 years ago. And that's what worries me when we say you need to do it this way, because 30 years from now, best practices may say you need to take a different approach.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to protect against. So,
well, and that's what I'm trying to protect for, is not dictating now what you must do in the future, but saying we want best practices, current best practices applied at the time. You know, if it's 10 years from now, fine, use the best practices that exist in 10 years. If it's 30 years, any updates afterward, come and use that.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. We don't know what they are, so learning about the ones currently, I mean, it's interesting, but does it really change what we're going to do?
Okay.
I'm struggling to see that, but that's just me.
Anybody else have any opinions? I'll go back to my question. Do we want to request of the applicant more details or a presentation or information on blasting practices?
Yes.
Why don't you just put it to a vote, Bob, and then it's official? Yeah.
So I think if people are sort of on the fence about whether that means bring the blasting contractor specifically, we could, for a first one, just put it to them to bring whoever they think they need to answer the question.
That was my intention.
Okay.
Anybody disagree, agree, have questions? Tim, you've been awfully quiet.
That's, well,
Or Joe?
he's still quiet.
Okay.
While he's considering, I'll just add
Sure, go ahead.
that I think I think that's a perfectly fine idea. It accomplishes essentially the expression from the applicant what the best practices, I guess, that they intend to follow, and that's probably good or better than a piece of paper that says these are best practices. So
I think
I don't think we should make a special invitation to somebody just to discuss that subject.
Yeah. Okay. I specifically would like information on the second bullet point of, how do you blast an outcrop without and come up to a specific edge. But anyway.
Sure.
So that's, I guess, a sense of the board to have the applicant, request of the applicant for more information on blasting best management practices.
Yep. Sounds good.
Victoria, yes. Hal?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth it, but
Okay, so Victoria, yes. Joe, yes. Tim? Well, he's thinking. I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence.
On the fence.
No pun intended.
I finally got it, Bob.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you going to get off the fence?
Sorry, it's late. I guess Tim dropped off.
Did he drop?
Okay, we still have a quorum. I think he his phone died. Well, but I'm suspecting he'll call back in. I'll say yes. So we'll go ahead and request that of the applicant. And as long as Susan and James just make sure that, the intention is not to necessarily have their blasting contractor come in if they're willing to do it themselves or they're well enough versed to do so.
I think that sounds fair.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Okay, any other questions for Winnie, Ms. Young, or any other town staff as far as the letter from the Conservation Commission?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
The black gum trees, are they in the 100-foot setback?
They're in the actual wetlands.
Okay, but they're not.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, that's what I thought.
yeah, they're in the wetlands.
Okay.
Has someone identified them already? Has someone from Conscom already identified the locations?
Yeah, I've been out there and measured them.
Okay. What I'm wondering is if it would be helpful for someone who knows where their location is to put an X on the blueprint and say, can you add these locations, instead of having the applicant necessarily go out and look at them and record them. And are you looking for a surveyed location, or are you just looking for like a general location?
I could give, for most of them, I could give coordinates probably. on a couple of them. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I still have permission to go out there, but that would be a
Well,
question.
that's sort of where I was going, is that if I agree with the intent to identify them, because that's perfect. That's exactly what a site plan is for. I'm a little hesitant to go ask the applicant to go resurvey their location if you're just looking for, you know, that there are 6 and there are approximately these GPS points.
Mhm.
May I ask a question, Bob?
Go ahead, Joe.
And this is to Winnie. Winnie, do you know these black gums? They are what, a moist soil tree. Are they, as far as you know, in the wetlands where they
Yes.
would not?
Yes.
They would
Yes,
not
they're
be.
in forested wetlands. Yes.
Yeah. So it would not really be desirable for the applicant to be there excavating rock anyway. Is that true?
No,
mean,
they shouldn't. They shouldn't be.
can.
They shouldn't be, they
I'm not.
can't.
I'm not saying not to mark them or protect them. I'm merely, and I wouldn't want to leave it to chance necessarily. But as long as they're it sounds to me like they might be somewhat safe if nobody's going to be blasting or around, but nevertheless with the equipment and so forth, maybe there would be other possible hazards.
Joe, the concern is not for the safety of the trees. It's more to have them noted on a site plan for future reference that they're there.
Okay, all right. So okay.
If
Well, that's fair
if they-
enough, but so there's not really a danger of them being accidentally excavated.
it shouldn't
Well,
be.
they can be cut, whether they're excavated
Well,
or not. In the winter,
okay,
they can be cut.
No, that's a good point. Sure.
Yep.
Can I just say something to that point?
Sure, go ahead.
The way that the ordinance in question about the 100-foot setback, it says vegetation within this buffer shall remain in its natural state. That's another issue of whether, if you decide that that's already been decided upon, will they be allowed to timber harvest, cut trees within that 100-foot setback? And when people are doing a timber harvest, they can cut in a wetland. They can cut anything. I mean, so I don't know. It actually is I mean, black gum is not a desirable,
Yeah.
that's why they're still around, because nobody wants them. They're too hard. But so if they can cut in the 100-foot setback, then they can get to the wetland and they could cut there too. So maybe it's a safety issue too, I would say, for the trees. In one wetland, a big wetland, that is noted in the Natural Heritage Bureau's publication on black gum. So that's already noted. They don't say specifically the GPS coordinates,
Sure.
but those are already noted in that. And then there is a small forested wetland to the east of the big wetland that I just spoke of that has at least two, and it was three trees that showed a DBH that would be consistent of being at least 300 years old. There's been no corings. It's just been by taking the circumference. And
Okay.
Foresters tell me that if it's this big, then it's at least 300 years old. That's a ballpark. So having a
trees that-
safety thing would be, a specific, so that those are safe, might be
As a
advisable.
point of
Go ahead, Joe.
information, are trees entirely harvestable? And I don't mean can you do it, but is it permitted in wetlands, designated wetlands?
Yes,
The
Okay.
town's wetland conservation overlay allows forestry activities by right.
Okay. So then it would be worthwhile that they be noted if I don't know what the intent here is of the applicant, but if there is some harvesting, and to Winnie's point, it may be true. I mean, the black gum is a hard tree, but on the other hand, the way a lot of trees are cut now, it's not just for lumber, it's for chipping, and they'll cut anything.
Right, right.
Yeah, and I think they're also, because of the resin, I think they're also rot resistant. So some people make them into posts and stuff. Difficult to cut, they're gnarly or twisted. But
I think that might be why the vegetation having to stay in its natural state in that 100-foot buffer maybe was put in a 100-foot setback area was maybe put in originally to protect not only the wetland, but to protect around the wetland. But
yeah,
so I can get, I just would have to, you know, I don't know if I know I was allowed to go out there during the ZBA deliberations, but I don't think, I don't know if it's been extended through the planning board deliberations or not.
Yep. Okay.
And I don't know if they've started any logging. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yes.
They definitely wouldn't want me out there if they're building roads or logging or whatever. They may not want me out there for that.
I guess I'm still stuck a little bit on these can be harvested with forestry is allowed, period.
Yeah.
Or by right.
So that's in the normal wetlands overlay. It just said, so in the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District is Roman 6A.
Yep.
So Roman 6A3, permitted uses. Permitted uses are all those that will not require the erection or construction of any permanent structure or building, will not alter any natural surface configuration by addition of fill or dredging, and that are otherwise permitted by the development ordinance. Bullet A, under that, forestry activities. It's recommended that they be conducted in accordance with best management practices, etc. But those forestry activities are permitted. The question is whether that is different from the additional requirements under Roman 6A5 setback, paragraph A.
Is that something you could do some work on, or staff could do some work on?
What I'm suggesting is that, yeah, I can think of how I would interpret that if I was the applicant. I could think of how I would interpret that if I didn't want them to touch anything. And I think I could probably make a case in a couple different ways.
Yep.
I think we can think about or look and see if there have been ways that we've had to answer that question in other cases, and we can bring you information about that. But I think you're going to need to make the zoning determination about, you know, if that 100-foot is absolutely no touch, you can't do anything because these two things are on top of each other,
right.
Or whether that just means keep it natural, and if you take some things out, you have to put some things back in to keep it green or what have you.
Okay. I agree with, I mean, that's, yeah, I would like some recommendations on that.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be good.
Could I ask, two things. Could I ask James to cite again the paragraph section he was referring to? And then I just want to add in the same point here, I don't, as I'm hearing what James just said and what I heard when he concerned about earlier, even though you've maybe you want to hard define what can be done in the 100-foot buffer setback area, that still doesn't do anything for protecting the trees, the particular trees, these black gum in the wetland itself. They may not be in the 100-foot setback area. And what I gather is they're not. So we seem to have to. It seems to me we have to address that as a separate matter anyway.
Yeah. So, Joe, I'm looking at Roman numeral 6A, which is the Wetland Conservation Overlay District generally. So within that, section 3 is the permitted uses, and paragraph A under section 3 says that forestry activities are allowed in normal wetlands.
Okay, thanks.
The next section that I referred to then, section 5, refers to the setback. And under that paragraph A is where it talks about where the Wetland Conservation Overlay District and the Conservation Area Overlay District overlap. And so that has the addition of the 100-foot setback, and that says that vegetation within this buffer area shall remain in its natural state.
A point of clarification, James, when you're saying this buffer area, is that merely referring to the 100 feet or that overlay area?
This buffer.
So that's where I was going next. It says you have to have a 100-foot buffer around the wetlands. It says vegetation within this buffer area shall remain in its natural state, and that was me quoting. It does not say anything about changing the rules in the wetland proper, but that restriction for the vegetation to remain in its natural state is more stringent than what we have applied in the normal buffer area, or indeed in the normal wetland area itself. So the ordinance doesn't make an explicit claim for what happens in wetlands when you also have the conservation area on top of it. It only talks about the buffer area. But you, one, have to get through the buffer area to get to the wetland. And two, it may be reasonable to assume that if you're applying areas that are stricter in the buffer area than you would normally apply in the wetland that's protected by the buffer, you should probably apply those same stricter rules to the wetland area proper, since that's what's being protected. So it's imperfect language and structure as it exists right now. And you are the official people who have the authority to decide what to do with this imperfection.
Could it be interpreted, if you allow cutting of the vegetation, then the wetland could be cut? But could that also be interpreted that blasting? That's why I put the other points, because if you open up the 100-foot buffer, does that open it up to blasting and excavation as well? Or can you be very specific that they can't excavate in that 100-foot setback area? Otherwise, it seems like if you open it up to forestry and cutting, then does that extend to everything?
So I don't recall off the top of my head precisely how the special exception was framed, but generally speaking, you are only given the authority to do the things that you have specifically asked to do when you apply for impacts to these things. So if the, and my recollection is that the impacts to any of the buffer areas or wetlands were for crossings for access roads. So if that was what was shown in the application, that is all they are allowed to do. And they are not, you are not given carte blanche permission to impact every place in the buffer area. You can only do it in the places you said you were going to do it, and you can only do it for the activities that you asked for.
They wouldn't be able to, unless they specifically asked to, they wouldn't be able to blast for those roads, to get the roads through if they need to, or would they have to ask for something special if those
I
two?
don't know why they would need to blast, since they would essentially be filling to get through it instead of excavating to get through the wet areas. But yeah, they would need to show that they are doing the bare minimum that they needed to do in those areas to get the road in. So, you know, I guess if it came to a circumstance where they wanted to blast or needed to blast to get clearance through that, if somebody brought that to me, I would say, well, that has the potential for more impact than you made us aware of when you filed for your permission, and I think we need to edit that ZBA permission to indicate that you're blasting instead of just, you know, bulldozing, filling, and stabilizing.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Okay. Is that something, some language or recommendation we can also request to town staff for interpretation of where the conservation overlay district and the wetlands overlay district overlap for?
So I think I could write up sort of a summary of this problem and what essentially you need to figure out and what your options are. And we can also look and see if there's any similar situations or precedent on this. I typically don't make recommendations for decisions to this board.
You're right. Present
Because
options
my
is fine.
understanding has always been that you prefer to reach your decisions on your own based on the facts. If you want me to make a recommendation on this, I will think it over and make you a recommendation. But I'm not prepared to do that tonight.
No, I wouldn't ask you to do it tonight. I think I would like what the options are for resolving this, and I think we can make our own recommendations based on that, but I'm certainly willing to listen to other people to that.
I'd like the options, but also I'd like to hear what James thinks, having looked at them all.
Anyone else?
Well, I will just say I would like the options, and I'm more than happy to hear what James thinks. But I agree with your sentiment, Bob. That we really, this needs to be our decision.
Yeah. Well, it is. I can state, and James has stated.
And James said as much. I mean, I'm not saying he was overstepping, but yeah.
Well, I voted against staff recommendations in Dover before. I won't get offended.
My suspicion is that there's going to be one obvious choice, but I don't know that. So let's go on listing the options for the board, and be prepared to state a recommendation if you have one.
Okay.
You don't have to do so in advance. Okay. What else do we need on this application tonight aside from a continuance? Anything? Okay. Discussion on when we would like to continue it to. The options, I think the intention was when we set this up is that we had more than one meeting to discuss this on before potentially making a decision. We've had our one meeting to get input. We have some more information coming from the applicant and town staff on issues that remain. The idea would be then to schedule this for some time when we might have a hybrid meeting of some type, or in-person meeting or in-person meeting. But that we have the 16th next Thursday for Aroma Joe's, and we have the 23rd for, I forget what's on that. That's Granite Street, I believe, and 2 new cases. So I would be thinking
August.
August is the soonest we could deal with this.
The board has discussed the possibility, but didn't put anything on that night, so didn't commit, of doing a meeting the last Thursday in July, which would be the 30th.
Right.
Yeah, I thought we were going to meet every week till we got this cleared up. Maybe I misunderstood that too. But
Yeah, we did discuss that if needed.
We did discuss it as the possibility of the 30th. We know Betty is not available on the 30th.
yeah,
And we have a bare minimum quorum right now. Still a quorum, because Tim's been
so-
unable to just reconnect. Traditionally or historically, we have difficulties maintaining quorum in summer.
okay, can we just go over what the likely schedule would be by number of meetings? So
Well,
like we have,
I would say the soonest we could deal with this would be the 30th of July.
no, I'm sorry, Bob, I did not speak clearly. So I'm trying to understand.
You're thinking about number of meetings until a decision?
Yeah, because I think we need to be open with the applicant what the timing at least is projected to be.
And to be honest, I think that of the cases that you have in front of you, this is the hardest one for me to get a sense of what that will be.
I agree.
That I think in addition to the issues that we've talked about tonight, I still have the issue of phasing in my head as something that needs to be figured out. They showed us what the physical phases are, but we know, for example, that we are not able to say phase 1 will take 10 years to complete.
Right.
And we know that the applicant has asked that we only require a reclamation bond for phase 1 and not phases 2 and 3 until we know that they're about to start phase 2, require a reclamation bond for phase 2. The both are in place simultaneously for a year or two while they get this reclaimed, and then we release this one. So they have no more than 2 phases bonded at any given time. And I completely understand that we can't say you're going to put this in year 10, but I am not quite satisfied with what we have in writing yet that we are necessarily going to know when we should be asking for that next bond. And so some of those are some of the details that if Peter and I sit down and his next draft gives me a perfect way to do it, it could be 1 or 2 more meetings. If we have to keep going back and forth and we don't know the best way to do that, it may take a couple extra. I think that for some of these things also depend on whether there are things that the board decides need to be peer reviewed or studied or reviewed by legal counsel now. For example, if there are commitments to future conservation, are we considering there to be a contractual aspect to that? I think in our prior discussions, we thought that a notice of decision and notes in the plan were fine to cover that, and I still stand by that. there's anything for the engineer to look at or what have you. I think that hasn't been thoroughly discussed or decided by the board. And if you require a peer review of road design, a peer review of reclamation, that's going to take time.
I think we should just sort of lay out what we think those are. I mean, maybe we can't. But then we should say, okay, next meeting, we're going to make our list. The following meeting, they get the experts in and, or, you know, some schedule like that. So we can have some sense as to what is going to happen on this. And that has to, I think in my mind, include, you know, what the timing would be for public input and all those too.
Yeah, so I guess I would suggest then for the next meeting, the Conservation Commission's letter has suggested some additional input that the board may wish to ask for. So I would suggest that you all think about for next time and come prepared to discuss, one, whether there is additional information that you're going to require the applicant prepare and submit, and two, whether any of the information or materials that have already been submitted should be sent to somebody for peer review consideration. You know, whether that's reclamation, road design, drainage, all of the above. Does that make sense? So I don't think not knowing the answer to those questions, I don't think we can give the applicant any sort of roadmap for what would happen beyond that meeting. But you know, we can certainly, if that's sort of our plan to discuss, do we need anything else before we make this decision, we can come out of the next meeting sort of with a roadmap of either we need to wait for this to go out and come back, or we're pretty far along the path to we're tweaking some conditions of approval until we're satisfied and then we're acting.
I can say right now that I definitely would like the reclamation plan to go out to review. You know, I'm the phasing plan. I think that I have some ideas on language. But
Bob, is not all of that in that one-page sheet that he put in? I have to say I didn't go through everything, but is not some of that in there?
The notes and some of the phasing are, like I said, what I'm struggling with are not the description of we do phase one in this area and then we do phase two. The sequence of events makes perfect sense to me. To me, it's going to be the trigger for, in order for the town to be protected, in my opinion, we need to have the reclamation bond for phase two in our hands before they touch anything in area two.
Yeah. Yeah, one second, James. So that particular point, that's not in what they submitted?
I think it sort of is, but what I'm looking for is some sort of indication about how we're going to communicate along the way so that we know when they are done with phase one and about ready to start phase two. Whether that's just so they have to file an annual intent to excavate to the Board of Selectmen, and that is mostly for the purposes of assessing taxes on what they take out. But if there is some way to you have an equivalent, whether the intent to excavate form can be the mechanism or some other similar letter, report, notification that they give to the land use department annually saying, yeah, we're still in a holding pattern in pit one, so that we know sort of, okay, you're getting close. They're maybe 3 years out before they're ready to do this. Now they're 2, now they're saying, all right, we're going to do this probably next year, so that we know to be looking for that bond to be filed. Same with if there need to be any inspections for the road that will eventually go through the initial pit to out back. If we would require the wetland crossings and the road that's being installed to be inspected in any way now, I think we should consider whether the future roads would also need to be inspected in the future and set those timelines. So I think it's mostly that, how do we communicate and understand at what point we're at and when those phases are going to be triggered, that I want to make sure we're clear on and we have a way to do. And I think I need a little bit more time on that. Maybe I'll have, in looking back through it, a clearer idea of what exactly I'm looking for, or if I'm not looking for something specific, maybe I'll feel more comfortable with what I've got.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I did not read and thoroughly digest the sheet 2A. But I have to say that at least what I did read looked to me like what we asked for. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned, you know, that we're going to think about reiterating or redoing. But I guess you're going to have to take a look and see.
Yeah, all I'm saying is, yeah, I certainly want to be more specific in my ask and or my, I don't want to say critique, but it's the easy word right now. I do want to be more specific than I can be right now. So I do want to digest that a little bit, and you know, maybe if I'm putting together a staff report for the next meeting, I can get some more specifics about this into that as well.
Yeah, my concern here is that maybe we haven't even identified all the major points or issues we want to go over with the candidate. And if we haven't, I think we owe it to them to identify them sooner rather than later.
I agree. I think we've been fairly forthcoming with what the remaining issues are, at least based on James's staff reports.
Yeah.
I don't think we've been blindsiding them myself, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I was under the impression that this was, you know, we had agreed on the format and the basis and all that. And again, I didn't compare point to point, but it looks like he addressed all of those. So let's let James do his report and see. But I would appreciate it if, as a goal for our next meeting, we can identify all the points, issues, experts, et cetera, that we need, and what the schedule will be for getting them in.
No. I think that's up to the applicant to get them in on a schedule that he or she can provide, not necessarily us. But I agree with you that that's what we would need to supply to the applicant for the information that he's to provide. Okay. So that's homework then for this one, for this case, is what other information does each member of the board want to see from the applicant for this? I've already stated, and what do they want? What do other remaining items, what needs to be sent out for third-party review, be that town engineer or however we want to do it?
Okay.
And that might be an email to the board from James to say, here are the topics that remain, and here are items that are applicable for or to be considered for third-party review.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we really don't even have a list yet.
Yeah, well, I think we do, but
Yeah, we're getting there.
we're getting there. I think we just need some consistency, and maybe that might be the trigger, at least, to be able to say, here's the items that are outstanding. We have drainage, we have phasing, we have reclamation, and these are the items that the board might want to consider sending out.
Bob,
Go ahead, Joe.
just, I think I think part of the issue for me is that, I'll just say that this is one of these long, ongoing situations, applications that we've struggled with on and off for literally years. And I think again, speaking for myself, you get a little stale about some of the things we've asked for or talked about in the past. I think the point that having James perhaps just consolidate the outstanding issues, organize them into a list that we can all review, make sure that they're covering what we have talked about and anything else that maybe has come up like you suggested, in some of the homework. But I think part of it is, for me, this all gets a little misplaced along the way. What we talked about, maybe what the applicant has even brought up, and it's kind of been lost in the shuffle. So anyway, a good review list would be very useful, I think, at this point.
Okay. I'm looking at James's February 27th report on this, and I think that's pretty good. Does
it in fact cover what
Yes, I think so. It's, land conservation, signatories, legal review, notice of decision, land conservation, road and drainage review, reclamation bond.
I'll look back at all of my staff reports and pull everything that is still relevant and active forward into one document.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
I was just
All
thinking,
in one place.
And it will include the whole 100-foot setback issue?
Yeah.
okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Moving back to where we were about continuances. June 30th or July 30th is an option. August is also an option. And I'd rather discuss it before a motion is thrown at me.
I'm game to meet every week, so we've got to get these applications addressed. But I don't know where I will meet.
Yes, good point.
So in terms of my scheduling, normally meeting every week would thoroughly hammer me.
Yes.
But we currently don't have an active EDA grant. So even though I have plenty of other work that I could be doing, I have no money to do it. So I think for me, sort of throwing myself into Northwood plan reviews for July is both feasible and also probably more practical than continuing to have a lot of this stuff going into August when we might have some of those grants up and running. So I can definitely work with the 30th, and it may actually be more convenient than stringing things into August. Also happier for the applicant.
Yes.
Let's do that then.
Okay, you want to make a motion?
Yes, I'll make the motion that we continue. I don't have the case number right in front of me anymore.
18-13 and 19-20.
So be it, and continue that to July 30th.
Okay, second.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. McCaffrey, second by Ms. Parmalee. discussion? Does that, James and Linda, does that give you enough time to get the information conveyed and back, or at least over to the applicant? And some recommended.
Question,
Go ahead, Susan.
is this going to be a hybrid meeting like we were talking about?
I would hope so.
Okay.
I think the plan, at least my intention, circling back to what we started with, is that once we have the ability to use the conference room or the meeting room, that at that point, all of our meetings would be hybrid.
Okay.
That, you know, staff,
I think at this point, it's probably best not to, speculate about what any, future meeting 3-4 weeks from now is going to look like. Just say we'll meet under whatever best practices and procedures
sure.
we're permitted to use and or are able to use at that time.
Well, the only reason, and this doesn't matter because this is a continuation. So when I did the public notice for the 2 new cases, I put everything in there, live stream, YouTube, Zoom, because I wasn't sure. I also said, it's going to be at the town hall. So I don't know if that's okay. I just went ahead and did everything because I figured more is better. So
I agree.
That's good to know.
But I think we can, at least my intention is, especially on the 30th, is that I will probably be remote.
Yeah, can I speak to that? Just, oh, sorry, Bob.
And I think, we haven't made the determination yet as to whether the meeting space is regularly ready to use for the public and other stuff to that effect. We'll probably have that sometime next week, or at least progress toward it. But for now, let's at least say we will have an online component of the meeting for the rest of this month, or the rest of July.
Yeah, Bob, to that point,
Yes.
the board did pass a motion to allow the meeting room to be used, providing it meets all the governor's recommendations and requirements.
Right.
And is subject to also the internal guidance. I have to say, I thought I saw, but I did not find the internal guidance that John had talked about. But the other point is that we also, at one of the meetings, set the meeting room capacity to 12. So that needs to be factored in.
And that's for total number of persons in the room.
Total number. And that needs to be factored in terms of what you plan to do. And ultimately, the details as to how a particular board or committee complies is up to the board chair.
Correct.
Provided, again, you're meeting the guidelines. So I sent a note to John, just so everybody knows, to ask him to see if he can't pull all those different things all together in one document and send it out to everybody. So hopefully he'll be able to do that over the next couple of days. But I know we did have the motions specifically saying it's open for use. So
right. I think that's all I was waiting for was how. I mean, I have my own ideas how we can achieve it, but I'm also not sole decider in that. So.
Well, and you may have to make some decisions based on how you handle staff and things like that, and that might change depending on what's available or built within the meeting room or not.
And that's what James wants, is a conference call or something, meeting, whatever, with John, I think between the 3 of us, to figure out how we're going to handle meetings in that space. So
would you please include Bob Young? Did you say Bob Young in that list?
So my initial thought was potentially Bob Strobel, Bob Young, John Scruton, me, Linda, Susan on that call.
Sure.
Yeah,
Just so
there
we
you
could
go.
all
Okay.
understand who's doing what and how.
Okay.
I just
But
wanted to make sure Bob Young was included because he,
yeah, I
he's
can
very,
send that
very
email
knowledgeable.
tomorrow, and we'll see who we can get on a call at the same time.
Okay. Susan, you've been trying to jump in. Go ahead.
Because the one thing that John kept saying was that he did not want staff to be in the
No,
room.
no.
Exactly.
Staff, yeah, he was pretty adamant about that.
And I get it because
Yeah,
once one of us
Oh, yeah.
goes out, the
yeah,
whole
we're
town goes
definitely,
out.
yeah.
So.
Can't risk it. So,
I completely understand that. I'm in that position myself.
Right. I mean, well,
Um,
we're all in that position
yeah.
for a lot of things. So
Okay. But yeah, if James, if you could set that up sometime, that would be lovely. Okay. So I think we have a motion and a second for the 30th. We just need to record the vote on that. And I'll let Susan do a roll call.
sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Joe?
Yes.
Lost Tim. So Victoria,
Yes.
Hal.
I'm using my thumbs up signal.
Okay.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Bob, and I think that's all we
Yes.
have.
Yes,
Okay.
that is all we have. We just have the 4.
Okay.
Okay, so 18-13 and 19-20 or whatever the numbers are, continued to July 30th. Okay.
Thank you, Winnie.
Yes, thank you, Winnie.
Nice
Appreciate
job, Winnie. Thank the Conservation Commission. I thought that was a
Definitely.
really good letter.
Oh,
Yes.
good.
Well done.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all your time and all your endeavors.
Well,
I will sign off now.
okay, thank you.
Say hi to Bob.
19-6. Do we have any updates on 19-6? Carter Family Trust, Fatherland Family Trust.
I haven't heard anything.
Yes. So we have been, unfortunately not from Mr. Carter, but we have been waiting for ostensibly for the driveway permit process to work itself out. And we did get an email in the last week from District 6 saying, hey, we have updated plans. I had seen a letter from them a couple of months ago saying we need various changes. So we said we have plans and, we just wanted to check in to see where this is with the town. So I gave him some background and told him this is mostly on hold, pending their process. They have a design that, looking back at the stormwater, I think was sort of initially on there, but because it was access and I was looking at stormwater, didn't quite register. That is a little bit updated from the first plans we saw for the driveway, and essentially has 2 10-foot drives that you enter on one side and then you can go around a circular drive physically around the clubhouse and then come back out via another divided 10-foot drive. And they were mostly looking for, potentially any comments by this board, but mostly comments by the fire department to see whether that would be a concern for site access. So I'm trying to get those over to the fire department to facilitate that conversation. Otherwise, I don't have anything else new to report except that it seems like we at least now know where we are in the driveway permit process instead of having no idea what was happening on that end.
That was the only item that they brought up, James, or were there other items that they also flagged?
That
Can't tell.
was the main one. Let me.
Is there something written on that, James?
Yeah, I can actually forward that conversation over to the board if you'd like to see it.
Yes, please.
Please. Yeah, we can read it ourselves then, James. Yeah,
Okay.
don't take your time.
So the email that I have from Jim Hewitt, who's one of the district engineers, and he's copying Roger Appleton, who I think is sort of overseeing the traffic review side at the district level. The email from Jim says, attached are a few documents, a site plan and cover letter that are the latest they have. And like I said, I believe that these are revised from what I had seen last. Their major concerns are the driveway geometry, and they do have some concerns with building on DOT drainage easement on the east end of the property. So I can follow up with them to see if there are any, if they hold that easement, if there are revisions that they would require on their end, and see if we can sort of coordinate any of these future changes so that they and we are seeing the same materials at the same time. I think that would be helpful.
Bob, may I?
Go ahead.
Part of the reason I asked this question, James, is that I recollect, based on some public input, that we were, at least I was, thinking that any traffic issues associated with where the drive is relative to the incoming, the next road down to the east, that if there was any issues, they would be highlighted as part of the driveway permit issues or concerns or reissue of that permit. And so I'm particularly curious if there was anything mentioned about traffic or traffic studies or traffic impacts.
There was not anything explicit in this communication related to expected daily traffic. There were questions about whether the plan as it exists meets the current parking calculations for Northwood. And my memory was that I did a parking check with what we had initially, and it seemed to comply. But I haven't gone back through in this yet to see if the number of parking spaces provided has changed as a result of the redesign. So that is something that I will be doing.
Okay.
But apart from that, they're thinking about they are asking us for feedback on the driveway geometry as it relates to fire and public safety access.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think we have anything else on updates for Carter Farther than Family Trust. Yeah, I think we have an outstanding request for continuance or continuous request for continuance. Sorry, it's 10 o'clock. It's getting late.
Yeah.
It had been phrased by the applicant to until he had his driveway permit.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think we have progress. But the driveway permit is still not in hand. So we could entertain a continuance to do so. The question is when. It's July 9th. Don't we have drainage as well for this that's due or that's outstanding? By my recollection.
I thought we did.
I thought it was a peer review, wasn't it? But he wasn't going to do it until he got the driveway permit.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It was 2 phases. Thank you, Hal.
Yeah.
Good memory. What I'm hedging about or thinking about is I don't want to push this off too far in the future so that, we get the driveway permit And then he's waiting for another, couple weeks for us to meet to say, okay, you got your driveway permit, now you can do what's next. So I would say, I think we'd be safe if we met on continue this to the 30th, because we can always push it off again if need be, or is that too soon?
No, I think that's good logic, Bob, because if they get the driveway permit, then I think automatic reaction would be to then say, yeah, am I required? And we could vote very reasonably quickly to say, yes, we want a second opinion on that. Or did we already vote?
I believe at the last time we heard that, you made the decision that you did want to send stormwater for peer review, and you made the decision that you did not want to require a traffic study. I believe,
Right.
I need to look back at the minutes to confirm, but I believe both of those decisions came the last time we discussed that.
Well, that was part of the reason why I asked that question on the driveway permit. But yeah, given that that's in place, Bob, we could continue it to the 30th.
You want to make a motion?
Knowing that all we're going to do is just say, get the, what do you call it? The peer review.
Yeah, period. Okay. So I would entertain a motion to continue case 19-6 to July 30th.
So moved.
Second. Okay, motion by Mr. Kreider, second by Ms. Parmalee. Discussion? Hearing none, and we'll do, Susan can do a roll call vote in whatever order she would like.
Victoria,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes,
Bob.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, did you get Victoria?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry,
Victoria was-
Start it off.
it's getting late. Sorry.
It's getting late. Cerebral Development LLC, case 19-17.
So this is one that
Mhm.
I do get the sense that we only need one more meeting after tonight.
Mhm.
So I had sent you some documents with questions from legal. I've gotten some answers on those from Chris, but I'd like to go down them and get the sense of the board on some of them so that we can at least tell Chris and Laura sort of what you're amenable to, and then it's up to them to get the language right.
Okay. And looking at this document, this is an email from James to Linda and Laura Spector, our town council, from June 25th at 11:13 a.m. if you have that email. And it is in multiple colors.
What was the date on that, Bob?
June 25th. I don't know when it was sent to us, but I can probably find out.
I think I sent it to you either last Thursday or Friday. July 2nd.
James, that first question, I'm having a hard time understanding her answer.
So her questions are in blue, my questions are in red, or my answers as a best guess are in red. So
So it's your, it's
the
your answer.
first question is this property actually in the agricultural soils overlay district? And the reason she's asking that is because the applicant needs to say what public purpose that conservation is supposed to fulfill.
Okay.
So if you,
Well, it's the third.
if you're looking at this as a subdivision, all of the properties that were part of the original subdivision that are now being redistributed in some way. The agricultural soil overlay is on this site. There is prime agricultural farmland on this site. However, the location of that prime agricultural soil is right up against Route 4. It is not on the open space parcel.
Mhm.
So to me, it seems a little bit iffy to say this is the prime purpose for why we're conserving this land, when the land they're conserving isn't the best land out of the subdivision for that purpose.
Great.
There are other.
My overall sense, that's what you were saying. I just was having a hard time with the word. And by the time you get to the open space, it's local importance at best. That didn't.
Yeah, so I'm talking about moving away from Route 4 towards the back of the property. So that's what I'm saying. By the time you get to the open space, moving away from Route 4. And then there are 3 categories of agricultural soil. There's prime farmland, there's farmland of statewide importance, which is the second best, and then there's farmland of local importance, which is the third best, and then there's everything else that we don't care about.
Okay.
So by the time you get to the open space, it's sort of the third best soil or no agriculture. So I'm suggesting that either instead of or in addition to that purpose, there's another recognized purpose in the ordinance that is along the lines of general aesthetics and keeping it consistent with the surrounding area, the character of the neighborhood, the natural environment, what have you. And I think that for this, with some of the concerns the abutters expressed about how close are you going to be building to my property and that sort of thing, I think that's an equally valid purpose, and I'd like to suggest adding that to the documentation as another reason for the open space.
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
Is the board generally amenable to that change if Chris is okay with that change?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
The second question, there are sort of 2 different ways that this is talked about in the deed restriction. So this is what Mike Sievert, the engineer, was talking about, where those 2 lots that are right up front on Route 4, if those are commercial lots, they're going to essentially need to do a calculation to show when we put our septic systems in, this is going to be what the nutrient loading is on the parcel. And we talked about and originally had basically extended those properties all the way to the back and put the easement on top of those properties so that you could use some of that land as part of their calculations when they apply for that permit. And my comment to him was, I think functionally this would work better if that land remained as a separate parcel. But I saw no reason why they couldn't reserve those rights to still count that land via easement. And I think that they are still hoping to do that, but the language didn't make it clear. In one place, it said it was just those 2 lots up front, and in a different place, it said it also included some rights for the third parcel that currently has the house on it and may at a future time be subdivided, but that proposal was removed from this application that you have in front of you. So in speaking with Chris, it sounds like he intends to only have those rights be for the 2 parcels on Route 4, and he's amenable to changing the language to read that way.
Let's, why don't we take a 2-minute break for anybody, since we just lost quorum. It's a little bit different when, Hal, we're on a 2-minute break.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I couldn't wait. Sorry.
That's no problem. Time was flying by.
Yeah.
When you're having fun,
Yeah. It's okay. I'm setting a goal to be done by 10:30.
I think we can hit that now.
I hope so.
I did have to relocate though, so my wife could go to bed.
Yes. That's why my office is down in the basement.
Well, the room that I normally work out of is under my daughter's bedroom, and my voice, you all are fine. Me talking keeps her awake. So I can't do Zoom meetings directly under her while she's asleep.
Okay. So I think we're all back. We'll come out of 2-minute break, which is fine. Okay. So back
So
on question number.
Are there any other questions about that second item? Okay. So the third one, one section of the model, because I think you're using a different property as a template, says that a certain section allows dumping and burning of burying of material that originated in the open space. I think the specific language says you can't dump, burn, or bury any material from outside the open space on that, which implies that you can dump, burn, and bury material that originates on the open space on the open space. So with that one, I think it seems reasonable to me, since those are activities that are related to maintenance of the property, to allow, the effects of maintaining that open space to be taken care of on that same parcel. We just want to make sure that that doesn't result in, unofficial brush piles from abutting properties. I wouldn't think that we would want to preclude brush clearance or removal or disposal, but we also wouldn't want to enable just letting it sit and become a fire hazard over time. So that's one. I think Chris sounded like he was generally amenable to taking some of that language out or firming it up so that there's no dumping or burning or burying of material, period. But I wanted to get your sense about what direction you wanted to go in with that before reaching an agreement with Chris on any of that.
James, the burying, I assume that would be like stumps and stuff?
It's product, if it's open space and it's stuff that is generated within the open space, then since it's not developed now, it would be, rocks, brush, any vegetative material.
Yeah, I don't know if you would take, stumps and throw them in a little pit and bury them, or, same with your rocks. I don't know if you would, if you were composting materials that came from the site on the site, if you would consider, turning that or, laying that again to be technically burying in some capacity. I'm not sure why that word was used specifically, but it was in conjunction with the burning and disposing and piling of brush anyway. So,
James, if I could ask,
Good.
what is the access for future maintenance, or, well, let's just leave it at future maintenance of this open area?
so this open space is entirely landlocked. And I believe we've already sort of had the discussion about there is not an expectation that this parcel needs to be a compliant buildable parcel, as in it doesn't need road frontage because it's an open space parcel and by its definition is assumed not to be buildable.
Yeah, no, excuse me. What I was getting at was just not for that purpose, but for possible maintenance of it. You may have suggested this earlier,
Right.
as far as
So-
butters. But
Yeah, so that's where I'm going. So
Okay.
the people who, so first of all, they're not setting any particular maintenance requirements for themselves. They are assuming that this property is more or less going to remain in its natural state. But I think that the disposal would be, that we're talking about here, would be for things like downward limbs and stuff like that. The people that would be responsible for the maintenance are the abutters. Susan, would you mind putting yourself on mute? Since the people that are responsible for the maintenance are the abutters, we would assume that their access to the parcel in order to do the maintenance would be over their own property.
okay, makes sense.
So is there any potential for these activities to interfere with the intended use of the easement? Just as an example, if you know if it's agricultural, does burying the stumps create pits and stuff that prevent you then from using it for agricultural or anything like that? Or maybe we could just say, provided these activities don't interfere with the intended use.
So agriculture is permitted use by the easement or the deed restriction as it exists. I think that is something that we're preserving the possibility for, but are not necessarily requiring take place. So I think if there are certain parts of the open space that become unsuitable for agriculture, they're not going to be used for agriculture.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So, yeah, like I said, I think Chris is amenable to changing some of that. So I just wanted to check and see if the board felt strongly one way or the other about, yes, we need to keep this language in so that people can maintain the parcel. No, we need to take it all out so that there's no possibility of there being an ugly brush pile on the parcel. Yeah, I think that there are probably plenty of acceptable points to come to an agreement with Chris on for this, and I just wanted to get your sense.
Can I add a comment to the agricultural discussion?
Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah.
I had spoken with Chris at one point, and he expressed a real interest in the possibility of a farmer's market or a community garden in the future, or at least a community garden that people could come and participate in. And I'm not sure that just because the soil isn't designated as prime ag, that there couldn't be some agricultural uses on that if that's the desire of the people that are putting this together. And, you know, we don't know in the future. I mean, you can certainly build up the soil. You can do a lot of things. Or possibly even maybe if it could be for animals grazing or whatever. But I wouldn't discount the applicant's desire to have an agricultural component to it.
Oh, I'm certainly not discounting the possibility for agricultural activities taking place on there. I simply thought that if we had to pick a single purpose out of the ordinance, the one that was chosen doesn't seem to be the best one based on existing conditions on on that property. He says, I'm doing this to conserve land that's in the agricultural soils overlay district, when the soils that are actually in that district aren't on that parcel that's being conserved.
Right, I understand that.
I do
Sometimes-
agree that if the applicant wants to preserve the possibility for agricultural activities to take place, that can certainly happen independent of, you know, whatever types of soils are on there, depending on what the interest is and what the activities are. And I think that the language that's in the deed restriction right now allows for that, and the language seems to be adequate. You know, I didn't see Laura having any concerns about how that was phrased. So, you know, I think that is certainly in order the way it's been suggested.
Thank you.
Hey, just one other point or question. Is this where the power line runs through, and is the applicant responsible for maintaining the level of brush or anything under the power lines, or is that solely the?
I think that's the power company's
Okay.
going to clear that if the power company has any concerns, and that's sort of a different easement area than what we're concerned about here. And if those two things overlap, then it would be between the holders of those two things to figure out, are you getting rid of that pile of sticks or am I?
Yeah, I'm just looking on the plot plan. Clearly, at least as best I can tell, the power line goes right through there.
Yeah, I think they definitely overlap in places.
Oh, yeah, it does, definitely.
Okay.
But yeah, this would not be speaking to whatever that easement already has in place for the power company's right to clear and maintain their own stuff.
Okay. So what do you need from us for question 3?
I mean, I guess I'm just looking for a sense of, yeah, are you leaning towards taking that language out entirely? Are there aspects of that you would want to see left in? Or is that something that the board isn't overly concerned about, and you think that wherever you know, we end up coming down with Chris on that is probably fine?
I'm not overly concerned.
Yeah, neither am I.
I like the intent of, you know, leaving it in, that the idea that any material that originates on the site can be burned or dumped or buried, but as long as it is originated within the open space,
Yeah,
that takes care of it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a separate sentence that explicitly says nothing can be brought onto the open space from outside.
Right.
In terms of disposal. Okay. The next section, section C, there's a reference to all lots. Is that just the 3 lots identified in the first paragraph? I think this is really just a language issue to clean up with Chris. And a clarity issue. So I don't think there's much to talk about with that. The last section then is talking about a few different sections related to the duration. The language in the deed restriction says that the deed restriction will remain in place, I think, for 30 years and then will be automatically renewed in 10-year increments, but that those 10-year increments after that first 30 years are an opportunity for all of the common property holders to take a look at it and see if there need to be any changes. It also says then that the town has the explicit authority to enforce Section 1, which is all of the conservation rules, but we basically aren't party to anything else in that agreement. And that also then has issues related to maintenance, enforcement, severability, and amendment of the document. And it says that only changes to Section 1 that we can enforce need to come back to the planning board. Changes to the rest of it don't. And I have some concerns with that if the enforcement section that gives us the ability to enforce Section 1 is not in Section 1, and they can change that other enforcement section. They can essentially take any teeth that we have out of the agreement without bringing it back to the planning board. So my suggestion, even though it might be potentially a bit of a pain for future landowners if they wanted to change some of these rules, would be that any change to the deed restriction needs to come back to the planning board, just to avoid any of those potential back doors to weakening the conservation.
Victoria?
No, oh, no.
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 I agree, James. We don't want any surprises.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the board's agreed on that we should just make it the whole thing, then I'll go back to.
Then there's no question.
Yeah.
And you got to
I'll
sue
go back to
people.
Chris with that, and I think the next step for that then would basically be either he or I could make those changes, send them back over to Laura to say, yep, that language looks good, or nope, you need to change this sentence around, otherwise it has a completely different legal meaning. And then I think as soon as she's got language she's willing to sign off on, this is ready for a decision by the board.
Okay. I like that time schedule, but does that allow for the public input, or is public input over at this point?
So we've already taken public input on this. So it's sort of up to you about how much more you need. My suggestion would be that the next meeting basically be for us to come back and say we have this language in the deed restriction that legal has signed off on as enforceable. It passes muster. This is our last chance to take any comments, open public hearing, close public hearing, and go into deliberations and decision.
So James, just bear with me, please. So along those lines, back to our earlier discussion, if we do that and it's not a public meeting or it's not a hybrid meeting, are we giving the public sufficient chance to comment if we don't wait yet one more meeting after that?
So I think in every one of these cases, you have to take into account sort of what the public interest or public feedback has been, and what remains out there to be commented on. So there were a lot of initial comments related to the Bean Road,
right.
Driveway access. That's going to be a big commercial entrance. Is that going to need new changes? And the applicant decided, you know what, I don't have uses lined up. I can't get DOT to issue me a driveway permit based on that. I'm just going to take that out of the application and come back when I have the answers to
Right.
that. And if I can't get a revised driveway permit at that time, that's just
Done.
something I'm going to have to do. So, you know, I don't want to speak for you or speak for the abutters, but it appears that the applicant has at least done something to alleviate a lot of those concerns. Some of those other concerns were related to, okay, what's going to happen with that open space? Is it going to go away? Can you change it? Are you putting things in it? And we now have an answer for them. It's not going away. It is changing. Some activities will be allowed in it, but we're also getting a permanent conservation mechanism on it. So I think that to the extent that those people may or may not want to come back, it would either be this mechanism that you have is acceptable to me and it alleviates my concerns, or no, I still don't think this is good enough, and I think you need to go back to what we had, or I think you need to push for more, or something like that. I think with notice for that, I don't know that I can necessarily speak for them, but the fact that we are getting something conserved and it will remain as open space, and there is separation from that back area to that commercial area up front, appears to be more or less what they were asking for. And I wouldn't think that we need to go 2 more meetings on this when somebody could submit something in writing prior to the next one meeting, based on the language of this. If it would make you feel more comfortable for us to get that language on the website so the public can see it and submit something in writing,
That's what I was getting at. Because if we can do that, then I think we've covered ourselves.
Yep.
And
we can
they
make
might
the
not.
application materials easier to access so they're aware of what our status is.
Yep.
But I don't see a need for, and I don't know that if we didn't do that, an extra meeting would solve the problem.
No.
If they don't know we're talking about this tonight, they're not going to know if we're talking about this
Right.
in another meeting to know
Right.
that they can talk at the third meeting.
Yeah, so I was leading up to if people are amenable to that approach, then I think that affects when we decide to continue to.
Mhm.
Because we need to give time to get the information put on the website, and then we need time to give people to respond with enough time for it to get to us and
Right.
all that type of stuff. So that's why I was asking. And yeah, obviously I've spoken before on this, so if we can do it in just one more meeting, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think from a legal back and forth with how quickly she went on the first set of questions and how, I think at this point, how easy it's going to be to resolve them, I'd say there might be a chance we could get this on for the 23rd. I would feel comfortable with the 30th, unless, Linda, you have any concerns about paperwork process, because I know there were some questions. She just sent us questions before I think we had finalized the escrow process.
What was the number of days we were going to ask people to give comments to, our number of days in advance?
10 days.
From the applicant, we wanted any changes to application materials 10 days out, so that we could make them available in the file in the office, potentially put them online depending on what they were, what the case was, and then any comments from the public, close the business the Tuesday before. So that would give you 2 nights and 2 days.
10 days, 2 days.
That's awful tight for the staff and stuff. and you. If you go with the 23rd, that's really tight.
I wasn't thinking of the 23rd. I was thinking
Okay.
the 30th. We already have a
Okay.
meeting on the 30th,
Yeah, okay.
and
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. This gives it some time to handle it. I think that's time enough to finish up the easement language
Okay, yeah,
and post it and have it available, and
okay.
so that'd be my thought. I don't know. I'd love to hear from town staff if they disagree. If they want more time, I think I'd certainly be amenable to that. I was thinking myself, I was looking at either July 30th or the first meeting in August.
Yeah, let's just make sure we have enough time so that we don't exercise people twice, in my mind. And if,
First
yeah,
meeting in August is, unless we're meeting every week, would be August 13th.
yeah.
Not quite the last day of the second to last day of our 2-week schedule.
Well, so far, based on what you said, really the 30th works unless we
Yeah,
find ourselves too tight to do anything extra on the 30th. But it seems like it might fit in. It sounds like it's going to be pretty
Quick.
easy to
straightforward.
work through.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we try for the 30th. The worst that happens is we do have to continue because we
I'm
couldn't be there.
suspecting there's not going to be much, and really I don't expect any further comment on this from outsiders because we didn't get a sense of that early on. I think James iterated the issues about the road, the driveway, and so forth that were the primary concerns. Traffic on the road, and all of that's out of the way now. We're just looking at really.
Oh, we'll see.
I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to continue this case to the 30th.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Kreider, second by Mr. McCaffrey to continue case 19-17 to July 30th. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, student, do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Victoria,
Yes.
Hal,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
and Bob.
Yes. Okay, I'll make CIP as brief as I possibly can. Was there any word back from town departments, Hal, that I asked about?
I've not heard anything. As you may have surmised from the last few selectmen's meetings, we've had a lot of irons in the fire.
Yes. Okay.
So my apologies, but
Not faulting you at all.
yeah, sorry.
Nope. No need to apologize. Okay, I will take that as a essentially stop on new information, and I'll start taking a look at tweaking some numbers and get that back to.
Yeah. Not to say that something didn't come in, but I didn't see it.
Okay. That's fine. I might see if I can get hold of
John?
the road agent just to say, have a conversation with him about it if he has anything to add. So, and I think fire department did fairly well last year on CIP items and warrant articles, so they might not be looking for much this year.
By the way, Bob, you were appointed to the highway advisory
I was.
committee. Congratulations.
Gee, thank you. Okay. Okay, I'll look forward to that. Okay, that's update on CIP. Anything else for tonight?
The only thing that I want to throw out there, as we get into the fall, we're going to be looking at potential zoning amendments for next year. The wetland conservation overlay that we spent the vast majority of tonight talking about was something that was on our list a couple of years ago, and we decided not to address it at that time because it was going to be a little bit more involved, and we had wanted to get the low-hanging fruit out of the way and then come back to some of the bigger stuff. So right now, that is essentially my list of potential zoning changes. I'd say over the next month or so, keep in mind whether there's anything else you want to take a look at.
I can add one right now.
Something that had been on my radar was the housing legislation that came out of the governor's task force on workforce housing that was going through the legislature. My understanding is that bill is effectively dead, not because of anything to do with the bill, but because of procedural issues coming out of coronavirus. It had a deadline, and that deadline happened while the legislature was out of session due to physical distancing, and the parties couldn't come to an agreement on whether to or how to extend those deadlines once they came back into session. So I think that and a lot of other legislation is just going to have to be reintroduced in the fall. That did have procedural implications for planning boards about how we do our business. So we have a little bit of a reprieve from having to learn a new way of doing things, but that's something to keep an eye on next year.
One thing just very minor to add it came up earlier. I think we stated that our zoning ordinances use both setback and buffers, but only one is defined. That's going to be a very easy, quick fix.
Was that in our ordinances, or was that in what the applicant had written up?
Both.
Oh, both. Okay.
The applicant used both, and I think I was on a call with the Conservation Commission for one of their meetings for probably over an hour, sort of talking through this issue with them too when they were thinking about their letter. And I think my takeaway from reading that section of the ordinance was that we were using the two words interchangeably in enough different places that they functionally didn't mean anything different in terms of the interpretation. So having one thing referred to as a buffer in one place as opposed to a setback didn't necessarily mean that you could do different things. I think you just needed to look at what that section said about what you could or couldn't do. So, that may be worth a replace all instances of buffer with setback, or it may only be a problem in this section of the ordinance, and tackling this section of the ordinance might fix that. Yeah. So that can sort of be a 1A on the list.
Yeah, that should be on the list.
Yep. Yep.
I had just come away with the impression that it was just the applicant, but if we're
there are one or two instances where buffer pops its head up.
Yeah.
In the ordinance language.
And it's used often enough in land use conversations that I think we should have a definition, or at least mention the word if we define them so that they are the same, saying used interchangeably with buffer or whatever. It's in there and we're covered. If there is a difference, we should declare that difference. So.
Right.
I know I use them. I try to be distinct between the two, but it's not always good. Okay. And I didn't want you to think I was not paying attention earlier. Okay. Anything else tonight?
I hope not.
I hope not either. You want to take care of that then, Victoria?
You bet.
Go ahead.
Adjourn the meeting.
Second. Okay. Motion by Ms. Parmalee, second by Mr. Kreider. We are discussion. Hearing none. The motion is to adjourn at 10:47.
10 late.
Yes.
10 late.
Okay. We're all
10:30, huh?
Yep.
Give it our best.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Have a good night. Sorry about my daughter burping. Embarrassing.
I didn't
I
even
thought I
hear
was
it.
on mute. It wasn't me.
That's okay.
He's a teenager.
Didn't even notice.
Right.
I
James-
did not. Thank you all for your help tonight. Appreciate
Good
it.
night.
Have a
Yep.
good night.